There's a quiet frontier where physics meets the mind, a place where ancient mystics and modern scientists seem to ask the same impossible question. Is consciousness born from matter, or is matter born from mind? For centuries we tried to separate the thinker from the universe, but the deeper we look, the more the boundary dissolves. From atoms that behave differently when observed, to thoughts that ripple through networks like invisible waves, the mystery only deepens. So tonight, at Neuro Nap Academy, we'll climb from level 1 to level 101 of quantum mind theories, from the most intuitive and simple to the most complex and mind-bending. Take a slow breath, and let's begin at level 1, where the quantum mind begins to awaken. We'll move with patience and clarity, beginning from the simplest ideas and letting each one lift you to the next. This is our first level, not a claim that settles anything, but a place to start the journey. Across early human cultures, people treated mountains, rivers, animals, and weather as if they had intentions. You recognize it today in children who talk to the sky or apologize to a broken toy. That reflex wasn't ignorance, it was a working model. If your world seems alive, you anticipate it, cooperate with it, and learn from it. Mind everywhere meant possibility everywhere. At this first level, what matters is the cognitive move. You project your own inner experience onto the outer world because it reduces uncertainty. Modern psychology gives this a quiet explanation. Your brain is a prediction organ. When cause and effect are unclear, it fills the gap with agents, voices, and motives. That strategy may misfire sometimes, yet it kept your ancestors safe. A rustle that might be a predator is treated as a someone, not a something. In that sense, animism is an adaptive bet mind assumed until proven otherwise. The next level opens with a more precise intuition. Awareness is like air. You cannot see it, but it moves everything. Early languages fused breath with spirit and mind, suggesting people felt a single invisible force running through body and world. You say a person has lost their breath, and also that they are speechless. Both point to a stoppage of flow. Breath connects inside and outside with each inhale, a small exchange that stabilizes the body and quiets the mind. The metaphor becomes a method, regulate breathing, and attention follows. This second level builds into practice. Slowing the breath steadies heart rhythms and calms the alarms that live deeper in you. You don't need technical names to know the feeling. When respiration is slow and regular, the body's signals of threat diminish, and thought becomes less noisy. People discovered this long before instruments measured it. To them, breath was not just air, it was a carrier of mind. The invisible felt real, because changing it changed experience. That is a test many theories cannot pass. Our third level begins when humans start studying inner life systematically, and the easiest laboratory is sleep. Dreams are remembered stories produced by a brain off-duty from the world but busy with itself. You fall asleep, and the gates to outside input narrow. Internal activity rises, stitching fragments of memory, sensation, and fear into scenes. The idea that dreams reveal truth came naturally. After all, they can feel more vivid than daylight. Without microscopes or sensors, people compared waking and dreaming and asked which is more trustworthy and why. Dreams also taught a subtler lesson. The mind can build a world without any external materials. That observation doesn't need mysticism. It is an ordinary fact. You have seen landscapes you never visited and spoken with voices that came from nowhere. Later, when thinkers tried to explain how perception works, dreams stood as a reference. If the brain can create a convincing world at night, then by day it may be constructing more of reality than you notice. Memory, emotion, and expectation are not passive spectators, they are builders. Now a fourth level appears, and it changes the question from what is real to what do you contribute to what is real for you. When you look at the world, your senses do not simply record, they negotiate. Signals arrive incomplete and ambiguous, and your mind proposes the most plausible scene from its prior knowledge. If you expect kindness, you notice soft faces. If you expect threat, you over-detect frowns. Shift your expectations and attention, and experience shifts with them. Perception is not only reception, it is participation. This level does not claim that matter depends on personal wishes. Instead, it points to how experience depends on the meeting point between an external world and your internal models. Consider a simple example. When you listen to a language you don't know, speech is a blur. After learning a few sounds, you begin hearing words that were always there. Reality didn't change, your mind did, and with it, your world. The lesson is modest but deep. Awareness shapes appearance. The lens is part of the image. Put the first 4 levels together, and a pattern emerges. First, you treated the world as suffused with mind to make sense of its dangers and gifts. Second, you discovered that breath and unseen rhythm can alter experience, hinting that the invisible matters. Third, you learned that dreams can generate entire environments from within, proving that mind is a world maker. Fourth, you realized that even waking perception is not a mirror but a construction guided by expectation. None of this requires complex equations. It is the foundation anyone can test. Seen this way, the idea of a quantum mind later will not arrive as a leap into fantasy, but as a refinement of a long trend. People noticed that inner life participates in outer life. They built practices, breath, focus, contemplation to influence that participation. They studied dreams to understand the mind's architecture, and in waking life they discovered that biased predictions shape what they see. A scientific century will add measurements and models, yet the original question remains clean. How does awareness change what becomes real for you? You may be tempted to think these levels are merely psychological, but notice the structural echo. A world built of probabilities requires an observer to fix an outcome. A mind built of expectations requires sensation to update its guesses. In both cases, reality appears at an intersection between what could be and what is measured, between what you predict and what arrives. The early levels have not proven physics. They have prepared your attention to notice a kinship of patterns when physics appears. This is our first level, our second, our third, and our fourth, laid out in simple steps as promised. Each level keeps the tone calm and the chain unbroken, a gentle climb from everyday experience to a principle that will support the rest of the series. From here, the path moves eastward in thought, toward a tradition that took these intuitions and shaped them into a vast framework. There the breath becomes a bridge to a cosmic field, and the individual mind becomes a wave on a deeper ocean. The next level begins with a single word that tries to hold everything at once. We continue up the ladder with steady footing, carrying forward the 4 simple insights you've gathered. This is our 5th level, and it begins with a word that tries to hold everything at once. Brahman. In the classical Indian view, Brahman is not a deity among others, nor a thing inside the world. It is the undivided reality from which world and mind take their appearance. The claim is spare and radical. There is only one field of being, endlessly expressing itself as stars, stones, breath, and thought. The implication for a quantum-curious listener is not that physics has been solved by scripture, but that an ancient culture recognized a foundational unity before the language of fields and quanta existed. In that frame, your private awareness is not a lonely flame in the dark. It is a local brightness of a pervasive light. At our 6th level, the lens narrows and turns inward. Atma. Where Brahman names the horizon with no edges, Atma names the witness that looks out from behind your eyes. Tradition compresses the relationship into a single equation. Atma is Brahma. The point is not poetry but identity. What you call I is a localized instance of the same reality that does galaxies and gravity. You can translate that into quieter terms. The contents of your mind differ from other minds, but the bare fact of awareness, the open capacity to know experience, is not two. Modern cognitive science, without borrowing metaphysics, maps something parallel. It shows that the feeling of me is built from many processes: interoception, memory, prediction, social modeling. When these align, a center of narrative gravity appears. When they loosen, the sense of bounded self can soften without losing intelligence. The old statement, Atman is Brahman, can be restated as a practical hypothesis. As selfing relaxes, access to wider patterns of reality increases. The next level simplifies the identity into an image, the ocean and the wave. You can look at a wave and give it a name, a height, a direction. You can say it begins and ends, but the wave is not other than the ocean, and its beginning and end are redefinitions of the same water. This 7th level uses that image to argue that individual mind is not separate from a larger mind field. It only looks separate because we focus on the crests. Notice what this image does cognitively. It allows you to preserve individuality without making separateness final. You can keep your personal story and at the same time suspect that your basic nature is continuous with everything else. In contemporary language, the metaphor rhymes with the way fields in physics present as distinct particles when constrained by conditions. We do not conclude equivalence, only acknowledge a shared structure of thinking, a continuous substrate, local patterns riding it, identities arising from constraints. Our 8th level shifts to a Buddhist refinement, consciousness not as a substance, but as a stream of events, moment to moment, arising and passing. The classical term points to a flow rather than a thing, and that shift matters. If awareness is granular and dynamic, then what you call mind is a process of continuous updating, much like perception itself. Ordinary experience hints at this already. You notice thoughts flicker, feelings surge and ebb, the sense of self tighten and loosen across a day. In scientific terms, you can think of the brain as integrating many signals on different time scales. In subjective terms, you can directly observe that every frame of experience is constructed, not merely received. Some researchers even argue that perception occurs in discrete moments rather than in a smooth stream, but you do not need that debate to see the practical upshot. Stability in the mind is maintained by rhythms, not by an unchanging core. This makes awareness trainable, because rhythms can be trained, and at this 9th level, that training becomes a method, meditation as the pre-scientific laboratory of mind. Here, the instruction is not to adopt a belief, but to apply a protocol, place attention on a chosen object, notice distraction, return or open attention to all sensations and observe without pushing or pulling. Over time, people reported reliable changes, increased clarity, reduced reactivity, a capacity to observe thought without being carried by it. Much later, instruments joined the room and saw correlates, more orderly oscillations in certain bands, more efficient communication across regions, modulation of networks involved in self-referential chatter and salience detection. You do not need the names to grasp the pattern. When attention steadies, the system rebalances, and subjective reports align with measurable shifts. The relevance to a future quantum discussion is not that meditation proves physics, but that disciplined introspection built a repeatable bridge between first-person observation and third-person measurement. It made mind legible, at least in part. We can tighten the chain now. Level 5 proposed a seamless ground. Level 6 placed the witness within that ground. Level 7 preserved individuality as a pattern without severing it from the whole. Level 8 reframed mind as a stream, not a substance. Level 9 introduced a method to verify and refine these claims through practice. What began as metaphysics hardened into phenomenology and then opened to physiology. The arc is not from superstition to certainty, but from intuition to operationalization. That arc matters because it shows how an idea about mind can be translated into procedures and then into findings. Even if you remain agnostic about ultimate claims, you can evaluate the methods and outcomes. There is another scientific echo worth hearing. In classical Indian logic, attention is seen as a force that configures experience where you place it. Phenomena intensify, and where you withhold it, they dim. Neuroscience mirrors this. Attention amplifies signal relative to noise, reshapes sensory maps, and prioritizes pathways for plastic change. The deeper philosophical thesis is modest and testable in daily life. Attention is not a passive lamp, it is an active lens that alters what becomes vivid and what fades. Train the lens, change the world you inhabit, first inwardly, then outwardly in your behavior, relationships and choices. Of course, these levels do not force a single worldview. You can read Brahman as metaphor for a lawful universe, Atman as the capacity for meta-awareness, the wave, ocean image as a reminder that identity is contextual, the Buddhist stream as a caution against reifying mental content, and meditation as the tool that brings these reflections under voluntary control, or you can take them at face value. The common ground is pragmatic. Each level offers leverage over confusion and reactivity, and increases your resolution on how mind manufactures experience. That leverage is the currency we will spend when we approach quantum claims more directly. Before we step west, a gentle caution. Parallels between ancient thought and modern physics can tempt you into one-to-one mappings that are tidy but brittle. Wisdom traditions speak in images designed to alter perception and conduct. Physics speaks in models designed to predict and control measurements. Where they converge is not in vocabulary but in pattern. Unity behind plurality, context shaping what appears, participation linking observer and observed. Keep the pattern, hold the mapping lightly. That stance will protect you from credulity without closing you to insight. This section opened 5 doors and left them ajar so air could move between them. You can walk back through any door and find more room, yet the corridor continues, and the next doors were built around the Mediterranean, where philosophers framed mind in the precise language of number, form, and intellect. Their questions tightened the meanings of knowledge, perception, and causation, and in doing so prepared an unexpected meeting with physics 2 millennia later. The next level begins with a simple question that never gets old. If ideas shape reality, where do ideas live? We keep building from simple to precise, moving from broad intuitions toward defined frameworks. This is our 10th level, and it begins with number. Pythagoras treated the world as intelligible because it could sing in ratios. A string halved gives an octave, specific lengths yield stable harmonies, proportions generate beauty and order. For him, mind and mathematics were not separate realms, but the same grammar showing up in sound, shape and motion. In today's language you might say pattern is prior to matter, because matter appears as whatever can instantiate a stable pattern. When you hear the claim that consciousness may be aligned with fundamental order, this is one of the oldest prototypes, mental clarity as resonance with lawful ratio. At this 10th level, the key idea is not mysticism, it is compression. Numbers compress the world into a form the mind can hold without losing its structure. You already act this way when you use simple rules to anticipate complex scenes. The preference for symmetry, periodicity, and proportion shapes perception from vision to decision. In that sense, the Pythagorean move is cognitive hygiene. Assume that reality's essence is structured, and your mind will try to match its internal codes to external regularities. Later science will push this deeper with equations, but the seed is here. Mind aligns by tuning itself to order. When it tunes well, reality clicks. Our 11th level steps into a more ambitious map, Plato's world soul. In the dialogue that sketches the cosmos as a crafted living thing, he describes a soul woven out of sameness and difference, stretched across the body of the universe to bind all parts into one coherent life. Ideas for Plato do not live in heads. Heads live in a world of ideas. When you learn, you are not producing shape from chaos. You are recognizing a form that was always available. Mind, then, is recollection, and the cosmos is mind-like because it is informed by those stable forms. The move matters. If intelligibility is built into the world, consciousness is not an accident. It is participation in that pre-existing intelligibility. At this 11th level, take the practical reading. You use categories that endure across situations. Cause, identity, change, goal, those are your personal forms. When your categories fit the world, you act with ease. When they misfit, you suffer confusion. Plato's proposal externalizes that dynamic. There is a set of best-fitting structures, forms, that make the world coherent, and the world soul carries those structures into motion. You can translate that into present terms without forcing anachronisms. Information precedes configuration. Lawful structure guides dynamics. Mind tracks structure by becoming similar to it. If later we speak of information as fundamental, we are still walking on stones he placed. The 12th level narrows from the cosmic to the cognitive, Aristotle's nous. He disentangles the faculties, sense, memory, imagination and intellect, and speaks of an active power that makes potential knowledge actual. Sense gives material, imagination mixes and stores, but nous abstracts, finding what is universal in the particular. It does not copy an image, it illuminates a pattern. That which is thinkable because it shares a form, and nous is the capacity to grasp that form without being identical to any one example. Some readings make nous almost divine, others keep it firmly human. Either way, the mechanism is clear. Thought happens when a formless capacity takes on the form of what is known. At this 12th level, recognize the elegant economy. If the mind had to contain a duplicate of every object, it would drown in detail. Instead, it learns rules that generalize beyond cases. You see this today in models that compress data into latent features, then use those features to reconstruct or predict. Aristotle's picture anticipates the move, knowledge as form-taking, not copying. That means minds can improve by refining what forms they are ready to receive. Train the lens, and more of reality becomes legible. Shift the lens poorly, and even clear scenes feel opaque. Awareness is not a camera, it is a formal adapter. Now the 13th level, where breath returns as concept rather than metaphor, the Stoic pneuma. They describe the universe as pervaded by a warm, tensile breath that organizes matter into living order. Pneuma is not mere air, it is a continuum of vitality, from the lowest cohesion in stones to the highest rationality in humans. The word logos threads through the doctrine, a rational structure immanent in the world, shaping growth, motion, and thought. Your mind participates in this breath by degrees. Clarity is a tuning of pneuma, not an escape from it. Here, the cosmos is neither dead mechanism nor distant spirit, it is a living system in graded tension. At this 13th level, the emphasis is integration. The Stoics do not ask you to flee the body to find mind, they ask you to align body, breath, and judgment with the law-like flow of things. That alignment looks surprisingly modern: regulate physiology to stabilize attention, train attention to refine perception to reduce destructive impulses, all of it embedded in a world that is lawful and alive. In a later century, when fields will replace solid ether and information will frame matter, this older breath doctrine will feel like a sketch. Mind is not trapped inside, it is continuous with the order that holds the outside together. Let's braid the 4 levels tightly. Pythagoras gave you resonance with ratio, mind as an instrument that plays in tune with structure. Plato gave you a world already poised for understanding, mind as participant in universal form. Aristotle gave you a mechanism, mind as active power, abstracting what endures across cases. The Stoics gave you a medium, mind as tensioned breath suffusing all bodies. Across differences, a common contour appears. Intelligibility is not an add-on, it is a feature of reality and the faculty that knows reality. When this contour meets physics, it will search for a substrate that is lawful, continuous, and capable of carrying order across scale. Why does this matter for a quantum discussion that waits ahead? Because these levels shape what you expect a convincing theory of mind to do. It should respect pattern over accident, preserve unity without erasing difference, explain how the universal shows up in the particular, and anchor cognition in a medium that is not isolated from the world it knows. If a modern theory can do those 4 things while surviving tests, it will feel like the descendant of these early designs. If it cannot, you will sense the mismatch quickly, because you now have a refined template. You might worry that importing ancient structures risks romanticizing the past. The safeguard is operational. Each level offers a practice. From Pythagoras, cultivate habits that favor proportion, regular rhythms in sleep, focus, and effort to reduce internal noise. From Plato, improve your categories deliberately, checking whether your cherished forms actually fit the evidence. From Aristotle, train abstraction through spaced, varied examples, not rote. From the Stoics, use breath and body to steady judgment when emotion surges. Theories that do not change conduct are ornaments, these change conduct. We end this section with a soft lock picking at the next door. The Hellenic project made mind intelligible by anchoring it in number, form, intellect, and living breath. But another tradition approached the same horizon from the side of flow, emptiness, and complementarity rather than permanence and essence. It spoke less of what mind is and more of how it moves when it stops resisting. That tradition will nudge us from being to becoming, from fixed identity to relational balance. The next level begins with a line that refuses to define. The way that can be named is not the constant way. We turn east toward a tradition that privileges relations over essences and flow over fixed identity. This is our 14th level, and it begins with the Tao, the way that can be walked, yet not finally named. The point is methodological. When you name a thing too quickly, you carve a boundary that did not exist in the flow. The early texts suggest a discipline of holding forms lightly so the underlying movement can reveal itself. In modern terms, think in possibilities before conclusions, context before categories, dynamics before definitions. Let appearance co-arise with conditions. What does such discipline buy you? It prevents premature closure. Psychologically, your mind is tempted to lock onto the first workable model. Uncertainty feels expensive, yet the Taoist posture trains tolerance for ambiguity, prolonging contact with what has not yet settled. In cognitive science, a similar stance appears when perception is treated as iterative prediction. Sensory evidence nudges provisional hypotheses until the best-fitting pattern stabilizes. The Taoist warning, do not force the world into your favorite shape, rhymes with that practice. Keep priors soft. Let data do more of the talking. At the 15th level, the picture refines into yin and yang, paired tendencies that do not cancel but complete each other. Dark defines light, stillness defines motion, yielding defines firmness. Translated into mind, this becomes a dance between narrowing and widening attention, between choosing and receiving, between analysis and context. You can feel this directly. There are moments when precision matters more than breadth, and others when stepping back restores coherence that detail obscures. The ancient symbol does not say pick a side, it says learn the rotation. Wisdom lies in timely exchange. There is a quiet neurological echo here. Without turning the brain into a cartoon, You can acknowledge two broad styles of processing. One style specializes in sequences, tools, and fine-grained distinctions. Another privileges big-picture relations, spatial wholes, and lived context. They are not enemies, they are reciprocal constraints. When you cling to one, the other withers. The yin-yang reminder keeps both available. Tighten when the world calls for exactness, loosen when it calls for synthesis. A mind that cannot switch styles grows brittle. A mind that can rotate remains resilient under novelty. An everyday illustration makes this less abstract. Suppose you are solving a tangled problem at work. The analytic style isolates parts, tests steps, and drives toward a clear decision, yang, but too much push fragments the situation. You forget stakeholders, timing, or hidden costs. Pull back, widen the frame, and invite peripheral cues, yang. Now relations sharpen. Who needs to be aligned? Which risks are upstream? What constraints are soft? Return to the sequence and implement. The skill is not to idolize one pole, but to sense which correction restores balance at this time, in this place. Now the 16th level enters with a word that once named the invisible, that binds body and world, Qi. Historically, Qi covered breath, weather, vitality, and mood, a single continuum of subtle change. Read harshly, that conflation is imprecise. Read generously, it is a proto-field concept. Everything that matters for life rides on gradients, chemical, electrical, hormonal, mechanical, and those gradients couple, adjust posture and breath, and the heart's rhythm shifts. Adjust the heart's rhythm and attention stabilizes, stabilize attention and perception refines. If Qi names that continuous coupling, the idea survives as a systems description. We can ground this in modest physiology without breaking the spell. When you slow exhalation and lengthen the pause before the next inhale, feedback from the body quiets alarms higher up. Signals from the heart and viscera inform circuits that regulate alertness and social readiness. You do not need the technical labels to use the lever. Consider also the body's bioelectric landscape, tiny voltages across tissues that guide growth and repair. Those potentials may not be key, but they demonstrate how subtle fields coordinate form and function. The older term bundled these couplings into one handle the hand could hold. The practical value of that handle is training. Traditional practices aim to smooth Qi by aligning breath, posture, and attention. In ordinary language, you regulate arousal, reduce internal noise, and increase signal quality. The outcome is not mystical, it is operational. Decisions sharpen because inputs are cleaner and reactions calmer. A calm system is not a dull one. It is a system that can respond without being hijacked. If Qi helps you remember that mind and body are one circuit, it has done its job. Field or metaphor, it points to the same lever, cultivate coherence. And at this 17th level, a behavioral corollary appears, Wu Wei, usually rendered as effortless action. The misunderstanding is laziness. The instruction is precision, with minimal strain, like a practiced musician whose fingers find the passage without conscious micromanagement. In control theory, this looks like low-gain regulation. You shape conditions so the system settles into desired patterns, rather than forcing them moment by moment. Translated to attention, you create room for outcomes to emerge, intervening lightly and only when the trajectory drifts. The less you fight the flow, the more influence you keep. There is a cognitive parallel in skill learning. Early in practice, you rely on explicit rules and hard effort. Performance is jerky and costly. With repetition, control migrates to faster, quieter processes. You feel ease and timing. Push too hard and fluency collapses. Relax appropriately, and the skill reconstitutes. Wu Wei names that sweet spot. It also counsels humility about uncertainty. Sometimes direct control increases variability. Patience reduces it. When the environment is noisy or partially observed, keeping options open, delaying premature commitment can yield better results. Effortless does not mean passive, it means tuned to the problem's grain. If you listen for future physics, these 4 levels hum in anticipation. Tao's reluctance to name aligns with a world that behaves like a set of possibilities before measurement fixes particulars. Yin and Yang prefigure complementarity, properties that cannot be maximized together, but together describe the whole. Qi, as a coordinating field, reminds you that fine-grained interactions can knit distant parts into a functional unity. Wu Wei suggests that observation and intervention are not neutral, they shape the outcome, and gentler, better-timed interventions can reveal more than blunt force. None of this proves quantum theory, it prepares your attention to hear it. Let's tie the bow for this section. You have practiced delaying labels to keep contact with flow. You have learned a rotation between analytic and holistic attention. You have adopted a systems handle for subtle couplings that knit experience together, and you have found a mode of action that preserves influence by respecting uncertainty. These are not exotic postures, they are general-purpose upgrades to how a mind meets a changing world. They render you less brittle, more responsive, and better able to detect structure where noise once seemed supreme. The corridor now turns toward a different kind of light. Where the Chinese view emphasized flow and balance, the next tradition spoke of illumination, of awareness as radiance that discloses and even completes what is there. It asked whether perceiving is merely seeing, or also a kind of making. That question will draw us into medieval debates about divine mind, emanation, and the status of universals. The next level opens with a simple image the night understands. When a lamp is lit, the room is not the same room as before. We follow the corridor from flow to light and ask what illumination means for a mind. This is our 18th level, and it begins with a doctrine that treats awareness not as a private candle, but as radiance itself. In classical Islamic thought, Nur names the light by which things are known, and in a deeper sense, the condition for their being known at all. Some philosophers describe knowing as illumination. Reality becomes intelligible because it is lit, and the knower participates in that lighting. Knowledge isn't merely stored, it is disclosed, as if switching on a field that reveals form without adding to it. At this 18th level, listen for the operational core. Illumination is an account of how intelligibility arrives. You can translate the metaphor into cognitive terms without losing reverence. Features in a scene are always present, but only some are weighted enough to guide action. When attention lights an edge or a voice, its signal rises above background noise. The light metaphor, then, encodes a selection rule. It says reality affords meanings in abundance, and awareness makes them salient. The Islamic lineage went further, suggesting that all salience is derivative of a primal light that grounds order. A second thread in that lineage sharpened the method to receive light purely, reduce internal distortion. You recognize the practical core today. When arousal is low and curiosity high, perception becomes more accurate and less defensive. In that mode, you do not invent structure, you allow it to show itself. Even without instruments, meditators, jurists, and physicians recognize the same rule: refine the lens, not the object. In modern language, lower internal noise to increase signal fidelity. The metaphysical claim, light is ultimate, is optional. The procedural claim, clear the channel, is immediately useful. Now our 19th level begins with a different tradition of light. Christian mystics and theologians spoke of illumination as the condition for certain knowledge. One view held that the human mind needs a light beyond itself to grasp universals like truth or goodness. On a practical level, the advice was simple: cultivate humility, patience, and charity, because those states open the mind to what is actually there rather than what it wishes to see. You can hear a cognitive parallel. Bias narrows, humility widens. If you ask better questions and suspend premature certainty, more of the pattern arrives. Bonaventure emphasized ascent through stages, each marked by an increase in light, from the senses to memory, from memory to understanding, from understanding to a quiet union in which division softens. Even if you read these stages symbolically, they describe a workable gradient: raw data, structured recall, conceptual synthesis, and a mode where grasping relaxes so the whole can be received. The aim is not to abolish reason, but to align it with a higher clarity. In ordinary practice, that means perceiving without the hurry to win. You see more when you stop trying to be right. Our 20th level moves to Kabbalah, where the image of light becomes architecture. Emanations, often pictured as a tree, describe how the infinite expresses itself as finite layers without tearing the connection. Each emanation carries a distinct quality: wisdom and understanding, mercy and strength, beauty and foundation, linked by paths that channel flow. Read literally, this is metaphysics. Read functionally, it is a systems diagram, a hierarchy of constraints through which potential becomes stable form. The mind, in this frame, is not separate from the tree, it is one of its living branches, pulsing with the same current. There is a striking cognitive rhyme here. In learning, you build layered representations. Lower layers detect edges, textures, and tones. Middle layers bind features into parts. Higher layers encode relations, rules, and meanings. Each layer constrains the one below and informs the one above. Failures at one level propagate. Misread edges distort objects. Misread objects distort narratives. The Kabbalistic tree speaks in symbols, but it anticipates a now familiar insight. Complex intelligibility emerges when energy flows through a graded structure that both divides and unifies. Whether the energy is devotion or data, the pattern is similar. At the same 20th level, notice the ethical valve built into the design. Channels open or clog depending on conduct. When anger spikes or greed narrows the lens, flow kinks. When patience, gratitude, and restraint return, flow smooths. Modern terms say the same with different accents. High arousal and strong bias degrade sampling, shrink hypothesis space and produce brittle predictions. Discipline, moral or attentional, expands the space of considered possibilities and reduces error. The old claim, virtue brings light, can be reread. Practices that widen perspective improve model quality. Here is our 21st level, a medieval theme that whispers of ongoing creation. Some theologians held that the world persists because it is sustained at each moment. Existence is not a one-time event, but a continuous gift. Others argued that perception is part of this continuation, not in the sense that you conjure mountains by looking at them, but that the world's intelligibility keeps being realized through knowers. Naming, classifying, judging, and loving are not insect scratches on the surface. They are modes by which reality's meanings come into play and into record. The world becomes legible through participation. Translate this idea with care. In daily life, what you notice and how you respond genuinely changes outcomes for you and for others. Attend to a child with warmth, and an entire developmental branch opens. Neglect them, and another branch closes. Your perception, what you choose to see and how you hold it, co-creates trajectories. If the medieval claim sounds grand, its everyday form is measurable. Systems evolve differently, under different observation and care. The caution is to keep scales distinct. Your attention shapes experience and action. It does not bend gravity, but at human scales, participation is real causation. You can also hear a methodological pledge in continuous creation. Revise often. If reality is being renewed, your models should be too. Treat knowledge as maintenance, not trophy. Calibrate, test, and refit. There is a reason communities of learning tied study to liturgy and ethics. Knowing well requires a stable ritual of checking yourself. That ritual might now involve experiments and statistics rather than chance, but the aim is the same: reduce distortion in the receiving mind, so the pattern can pass through with fewer losses. Gather the 4 levels and watch the outline sharpen. Illumination says intelligibility is granted and received, not seized. Emanation says structure channels that intelligibility through graded paths. Realism says there are enduring forms your mind can truly grasp. Participation says the grasp itself helps complete the scene at human scales. None of these claims forces physics. Each offers a template for thinking that later quantum questions can inhabit: selection by attention, layered representation, lawful invariance, and observer-linked outcomes. The harmonies are suggestive, not decisive, and that distinction keeps the series honest. A pragmatic summary keeps the lamp steady. If you want more light in cognition, reduce internal noise, widen curiosity, and act in ways that keep channels open, habits that make better sampling likely. If you want more faithful grasp of universals, train on varied examples and test whether your categories predict new cases. If you want participation to uplift rather than distort, treat attention as a responsibility. What you light up in others tends to grow. The metaphors were written in sanctuaries, but their leverage works in laboratories and living rooms. The corridor bends again. The next door is heavy, iron-rimmed, and pitted by centuries, a mechanistic universe, reconstructed as gears and laws, precise and fragmentable, promising certainty without illumination. There, mind is demoted or split from matter. Prediction replaces prayer. Measurement rivals meaning. We step across that threshold to learn what the machine can and cannot say about a mind that still insists on light. The next level opens with a sharp click. A clock starts ticking, and a ghost peers out from between its teeth. We cross the iron threshold into precision and gears, where prediction became a calling and certainty felt within reach. This is our 22nd level, and it opens with a split that shaped centuries, mind on one side, matter on the other. Descartes named thinking substance and extended substance, drawing a line that protected interior life from being crushed by mechanism while freeing physics to advance without theological friction. You can see the bargain. By bracketing awareness as a different kind of thing, science could measure motion cleanly, yet the bargain smuggled in a riddle. How does what has no length push what occupies space? At this level, the riddle deepens when method hardens. To study bodies, you remove qualities that depend on a point of view. Color becomes wavelength, warmth becomes kinetic agitation, taste dissolves into chemistry. The remaining world is shapes, trajectories, forces, everything that can be agreed upon from any vantage. It works brilliantly. You hold tides, pendulums, and planets in the same equations, but the success widens the gap. If the physical description is complete and closed, where does a feeling fit? When you say, "I hurt" or "I hope," what force have you named that could move a molecule? At our 23rd level, a new confidence arrives with universal law. The same mathematics governs cannonballs and comets. Prediction leaps across scale. In this mood, a thinker imagines that given perfect information about positions and velocities, the future and past would be transparent. Whether or not anyone endorsed the fantasy fully, the ethos mattered. The world is a clock, knowable by analysis, decomposable into parts whose interactions are sufficient to explain the whole. The ideal observer became not a saint but a calculator. In that shift, you gain power and lose a place for subjectivity that cannot be translated into number. The cognitive reward is obvious. You learn to trust models that compress reality into parameters and laws, then test them with prediction. But the ethical and experiential costs flicker at the edge. If the system is closed under physical causes, intentional descriptions become convenience only, not truth. Your choices shrink to rearrangements of trajectories. Some thinkers kept a space for soul beyond the charted world. Others accepted that mind must be re-expressed in mechanical terms, or else be exiled from explanation. Either way, the pressure increases. Find a bridge or admit a gulf. Here the next level begins. This is our 24th. Hobbes proposed that there is no gulf to cross because there are not two kinds of thing. Thought is motion, appetite is motion, aversion is motion, impressions strike, traces persist, trains of association flow like cogs catching teeth. On this view, mind is not an invader of matter but a pattern within it, complex, fast and opaque to naive introspection, yet still mechanical. The wager is clarity. If you refuse mysteries of substance, you can cash psychology into physiology and eventually computation. The cost is that experience becomes a byproduct of machinery with no special causal role. You can feel the traction of this reduction. To understand a mill, you map wheels, gear ratios, and friction. To understand a brain, map fibers, thresholds, and circuits. As those maps improve, behavior that once looked ghostly becomes predictable. Yet the clarity does not extinguish a persistent spark. However beautifully you describe the workings, there remains the simple fact that the workings are known from the inside. When you stub a toe, there is not only a signal, there is a hurt. The map accounts for the signal and the twitch. The hurt still asks to be accounted for. Now our 25th level offers a different escape from the original split. Spinoza argued there is only one substance, infinite and indivisible, appearing under different aspects. Thought and extension are not two kinds of stuff, but two ways the same reality is expressed. Your body and your mind are one thing viewed dual aspect, like a surface seen from front and back. In this picture, the interaction problem dissolves. Nothing crosses over, because nothing is fundamentally separate. Laws that form chains in the realm of bodies run in parallel with laws in the realm of ideas. The orders mirror without touching. This monism preserves determinism, while recasting freedom. You are most free, not when you break the chain of causes, impossible on this view, but when you understand it and align with it. Emotion becomes a modulation of a single striving for persistence. Reason, a way of seeing necessities as friendly rather than hostile. The picture is austere and consoling. It denies exceptions, yet invites serenity in grasping order. For a mind preparing to hear about fields that pervade space and laws that knit everything, the resonance is obvious. Unity first, differences as expressions, not divisions. And our 26th level states the paradox that survived every clock and law. If mechanism is complete, why does anything feel like anything? The question is not about control, it is about presence. However fine-grained your model of neural traffic, the qualities of experience, color, pain, longing, do not appear as extra forces pushing atoms. But they are there, and they matter to the one who is living them. Explain them away, and you falsify the datum. Reify them as a second substance, and you inherit the old interaction problem. treat them as identical to processes, and the identity seems to leave something out. You can name this the explanatory gap without abandoning progress. The gap is a signal that your current terms compress certain regularities perfectly while failing to capture what it is like. In practice, that means two complementary tasks. First, keep mapping mechanisms. They reveal lawful handles for healing and improvement. Second, refine methods that bring first-person data into disciplined relation with third-person measures, so experience is not dismissed because it resists simple translation. The mechanistic age perfected the second task's rival. The next chapters will attempt a synthesis. What follows then is not a rejection of the machine, but a rewiring of its image. As invisible forces enter the picture, charges, fields, waves, matter will stop looking like billiard balls and start looking like patterns in a medium. A frog's leg will twitch under a spark. A magnet will move iron without touching it. A storm of electrons will hint at a deeper substrate that carries form across space. In that world, mind will be compared not to cogs, but to currents. The next level begins with a jolt that made life look less like a clock and more like a circuit. We leave gears and enter currents, still climbing from simple to precise. This is our 27th level, the discovery that living tissue carries electricity. A frog's leg twitches when a metal arc touches nerve and muscle, and suddenly vital spirit looks like voltage. Investigators follow the spark. They build piles and wires, refine contacts, and learn to separate artifact from signal. They place electrodes on nerves and watch movements obey timing. The insight is quiet but seismic. The body is not only chemistry and leverage, it is circuitry. Thought begins to resemble organized charge, not ghostly vapors. Once motion can be summoned with a spark, the metaphor of mind shifts from mill to telegraph, a network of excitable fibers, sending information as pulses that can be measured, compared, and one day modeled. At this same level, precision grows teeth. Nerves do not transmit instantly. They have speed, finite, measurable, surprisingly slow. You send an impulse and wait. A muscle contracts with a delay. That delay anchors physiology in time and distance, turning sensation and action into traffic under constraints. Every choice you make must ride those roads. You now possess handles for intervention, anesthetics to quiet spikes, electrical stimulation to provoke them, signaling thresholds to be raised or lowered. Mechanism has not vanished, it has been rewired. Minds are still material, but their materiality is dynamic, temporal, and sensitive to minute changes in potential. The story of mental energy becomes the story of patterns that propagate through living matter. Here begins our 28th level, animal magnetism. Before fields were equations, they were hunches about invisible influence. Mesmer imagines a universal fluid, linking bodies, moods and maladies. He moves iron and glass, waves hands and wands. Patients convulse, calm and sometimes heal. Critics cry fraud, defenders cry miracle. What survives scrutiny is neither magic nor nothing, but the power of expectation, ritual, and social feedback to alter physiology. The setting, the symbols, the focus, the timing, together they tune arousal, attention, and interpretation. Relief follows, sometimes lasting, sometimes brief. The lesson is not to adopt Mesmer's fluid, but to keep his practical residue. Humans form fields of influence through suggestion and synchrony. Bodies resonate in groups, meaning itself modulates symptoms. Read that residue operationally. A coherent narrative, a trusted voice, a predictable ritual. These lower internal noise and boost signal for regulation. Placebo is not an accusation, it is a mechanism whereby beliefs recruit naturally available pathways for relief. No universal fluid is required to explain why a calm room, steady breath, and confident guidance can reduce pain or soften panic. Yet the attraction of the fluid foretells a deeper turn. People sense that forces could connect without contact, that structure could travel through emptiness, that order could be carried by something finer than gears. They were wrong about the fluid, but right about the need for a carrier. Our 29th level opens with that carrier made precise, the electromagnetic field. Faraday draws lines of force. Maxwell binds them with equations that predict, unify, and astonish. Electricity and magnetism are not separate tricks. They are faces of one continuous field that ripples at the speed of light. Action at a distance dissolves into local rules. What happens here depends on the field here, which depends on what happened there, moments ago. The world grows a new texture. No longer hard dots pushing each other, but soft patterns spreading through an invisible medium. You cannot bottle a field the way you bottle air. You describe it, calculate it, and watch its predictions land on copper, iron, and sky. This field picture changes how you imagine mind. If matter is partly pattern in fields, then a brain is not merely a stack of parts, but an arena where patterns couple, amplify, cancel, and stabilize. Oscillations appear. Synchrony becomes a variable. Timing is as causal as force. Small currents coordinate distant regions. Shifting rhythms alter what wins the competition for awareness. Nothing mystical is implied. Only this: explanation begins to privilege configuration over component. The old desire for a subtle medium that carries influence returns, stripped of romance and dressed in mathematics. Invisible does not mean imaginary. It can mean measurable in its consequences, lawful in its flow. And this brings us to the 30th level, William James and the stream of consciousness. He listens inward with disciplined patience and reports that thought is not a train of boxes but a river of relations. There are flights and perches, transitions and restings, a fringe of vague sense around the center of clarity, selective attention that brightens one object and dims a rival. He insists that consciousness is personal, continuous, and goal-directed, not chopped into discrete pellets except by our convenience. He declines to reduce it to one thing, and instead describes its functions. It chooses, it emphasizes, it owns. Psychology becomes a natural science, not by denying experience, but by treating it as data gathered with care. James's method anticipates your task in this series. He neither canonizes introspection nor discards it. He treats it as an instrument that needs training, calibration, and cross-checking against behavior and biology. In that triangulation, a theme returns. Attention is not passive illumination. It is an active lens that shapes what moves from possibility to prominence. When you decide, the stream tips. When emotion surges, the banks shift. When habit takes over, the current narrows. Every later theory of mind, computational, dynamical, or quantum, will inherit these constraints. Continuity, selectivity, and purpose must be explained, or at least modeled. Otherwise, the account fails at the first phenomenological hurdle. Tie these 4 levels into one rope you can hold. Bioelectricity proves that living tissue traffics in charge and time. Mesmerism, once stripped to practice, shows that meaning and context recalibrate bodily systems. Maxwell's field gives you a lawful substrate for influence without contact. James gives you a disciplined vocabulary for what the stream feels like from within. The convergence is quiet but sturdy. Patterns and fields outside, patterns and flows inside. Both lawful, both sensitive, both able to be shaped by regulation and relation. You have walked from spark to field to stream, and each step has dissolved a little more of the old clock. Notice the philosophical dividend. The machine did not die, it learned to hum. Determinism became dynamics, parts became patterns, cause became coupling, explanation expanded to include timing, context, and relation. This is not a place to smuggle in mystery, it is a place to prepare for subtlety. If fields can be real and invisible, if patterns can be causal without being things, then later talk of probabilities and observers will feel less alien. You are not being asked to believe more. You are being trained to see structure where a simpler eye saw only substance. We close by pointing to the next door, where certainty itself loosens. Currents and fields remain, but space and time bend. Measurement bites the thing it measures. Prediction meets principled limits. The clock already became a circuit. Now the circuit becomes a question mark. The next level begins with a light that behaves like a particle until you watch for waves, and a particle that behaves like a wave until you insist on a point, proof that the world will no longer be bullied by a single picture. We move from currents to concepts that loosen what once felt unshakable. This is our 31st level, and it begins with a revision of space and time so deep that everyday intuition must bend. You were taught to treat seconds and meters as universal rulers, identical for all observers, everywhere. Relativity denies that comfort. 2 principles anchor it. The laws of physics hold in every inertial frame, and the speed of light is the same for everyone who measures it. Hold both, and the rest follows with quiet inevitability. Clocks that move relative to you tick more slowly. Lengths aligned with motion shrink. Events that appear simultaneous to you do not line up for an observer moving past. None of this is illusion. It is geometry. Time and space woven into a single fabric whose measurements depend on the path you take through it. There are invariants that everyone agrees on, but many quantities, duration, distance, even the order of now, are conditional. The lesson for mind is not that truth dissolves, but that truth is layered. What you measure and how you move co-determine what you can claim. The practical power of this level is humility upgraded by precision. You cannot insist that your frame is the frame. You must translate between perspectives with lawful rules. That posture mirrors good cognition. When you reason well, you accept that your present vantage imposes constraints, and you compensate by learning the transformations that relate your view to another's. In physics, the mathematics is exact. In psychology, the conversions are softer. In both, the commitment stands. Do not confuse a slice for the whole. Relativity thus plays double duty, rescuing physical law from parochialism and training the mind to separate invariance from conventions. The next level begins with a beam on metal and an outcome that refused classical bookkeeping. Shine light on a metal surface and electrons fly out, but only if the light's frequency exceeds a threshold. Increase intensity without raising frequency, and emission does not start. Raise frequency and even a dim beam liberates electrons instantly. The simplest story is also the most radical. The energy exchange between light and matter occurs in packets. The interaction is quantized. Light delivers energy in discrete lumps tied to frequency, not in a continuous pour. Detectors count click by click where old models predicted a smooth flow. In this 30-second step you meet a rule that will persist. The answer you receive depends on the question you pose and the scale at which you pose it. Ask for continuity, and nature replies with steps. Ask for steps, and the statistics of many events recover a kind of smoothness. Either way, your method shapes what becomes salient. Operationally, that rule says experiments are conversations, not monologues. You configure a source, a target, and a detector. You control timing and thresholds. You define what counts as a signal. Change the configuration, and the pattern of answers shifts, not because nature is whimsical, but because you have changed which aspect of a process can express itself. In cognition, you do the same. The questions you ask of experience act like filters. They elevate some features and bury others. The photoelectric effect lends your attention a slogan. Tune the question or misread the scene. Now our 33rd level, uncertainty with a capital U. You have been told that measurement errors are about clumsy instruments, but Heisenberg's principle is not an apology for bad gear. It is a limit built into how the world presents itself. Certain pairs of quantities, position and momentum, for example, cannot both be made arbitrarily sharp at once. The narrower you squeeze one, the wider the other must spread. This is not a story about hidden disturbances you might one day eliminate. It is a statement about complementary descriptions of systems whose behavior has wave-like character. Pin down where a thing is, and you necessarily recruit a wider range of possible motions. Constrain the motions tightly, and location blurs. The equations make this unavoidable, but the conceptual move is simple. Knowledge has trade-offs that cannot be bargained away. You can translate the moral without math. When you insist on a high-resolution snapshot, you sacrifice context. When you track context faithfully, you give up pinpoint sharpness. Your mind negotiates this trade every day. In conversation, you can focus on a single word's nuance or on the speaker's overall intent. You rarely perfect both simultaneously. Good judgment is not the fantasy of perfect knowledge. It is the art of choosing which uncertainty to accept to get the job done. Heisenberg is not license for vagueness. It is instruction in disciplined limits. At this level, a philosophical echo returns with more sobriety than metaphor. Ancient doctrines suggested that the way you attend affects what appears. Physics, wary of such claims, still must admit that measurement is interaction, and interaction alters possibilities. The observer effect is not a mystic's flourish. It is a practical reminder that to know a system, you must couple to it, and coupling changes it. The thermometer steals a little heat. The photon that locates an electron also kicks it. The probe that isolates a signal introduces boundaries absent before. In quantum domains, these perturbations are not annoyances to be engineered away. They are constitutive of what it means for properties to have values at all. Handle this carefully. Nothing here requires consciousness to push particles around. The observer may be a Geiger tube, a camera, or a silicon chip. The observation is the establishment of a definite outcome in a context that allowed many. But if you step back to the scale of human inquiry, the parallel is instructive. You rarely access a fact without arranging a scene, and the scene you arrange writes itself into the fact you read. Ancient counsel to hold attention lightly, so as not to deform what you wish to see, finds a sober cousin in laboratory design. Minimize invasive couplings when you can. When you cannot, model them honestly. Gather the 4 steps and notice the pattern tightening. Relativity instructs you to distinguish invariance from frame-bound measurements and to carry lawful translations between perspectives. Quantization reminds you that energy and detection come in packets, so experimental questions must be matched to scales. Uncertainty fixes principled limits on joint knowledge and demands courage in choosing which description to sharpen. The observer effect insists that knowing is doing. The apparatus participates in the story it records. What began as a machine world became a field world. Now it becomes a world of contextual answers, where method and outcome are intertwined by necessity, not by oversight. There is a cognitive dividend in accepting this world. You learn to design your own inquiries with the same humility, state the frame you are in, align your questions with the granularity of the situation, admit the trade-offs you must accept, and account for how your presence changes the scene. That posture does not weaken truth, it protects it from overreach. It also prepares you for the next move, where uncertainty and context are formalized into an object that evolves until a question is asked, a mathematical entity that encodes possibilities and their relations. We stand at the hinge. You have accepted that answers carry the stamp of their questions, that sharpness comes with a price, and that measurement is participation. The next level will reveal what exactly evolves when no one is measuring, what possibility means when it is quantified, and why a cat in a box could be both an honest problem and a parable of misunderstanding. In other words, we are ready to meet the wave function that carries maybes as if they were a kind of being. The door opens on a symbol that behaves like water until you press it, and like a coin toss after. We now face the mathematical object that carries possibility itself. This is our 35th level, and it opens with a famous provocation, a cat sealed in a box with a device whose trigger depends on a quantum event. If the microscopic part remains in a superposition of alternatives, the macroscopic cat seems forced into a similar bet, alive and not yet decided, dead and not yet decided, until an observation selects one definite history. The point of this thought experiment was never to delight in paradox, but to corner you into admitting a gap. The equations allow many mutually exclusive maybes to coexist, yet you always record a single result. The question is not merely what is the cat doing, but what does the wave of possibilities represent, and what counts as the act that resolves it. Keep the cat on the table a moment longer. The setup compresses the measurement problem into a story you can picture without apparatus. The quantum part evolves smoothly, according to rules that predict interference and correlation with great accuracy. The macroscopic part, your notebook entry that says alive or dead, never records a blur, it records one. The tension is structural. Between the micro and the macro, something changes in how you are allowed to describe the world. If you insist that nothing special happens, then you must live with many branches where all outcomes persist. If you insist that something special happens, you must say what that something is and when it occurs. The cat demands a stance, not a slogan. Our 36th level begins with a principle that refuses to be reduced to a single picture, complementarity. You can design an experiment that reveals wave-like behavior, or you can design one that reveals particle-like behavior, but the same arrangement will not reveal both with full clarity at once. Close one set of possibilities and another opens, close the second, and the first returns. The two descriptions are not a matter of personal taste. They are bound to mutually exclusive setups that nevertheless describe one and the same system. This is not contradiction, it is a discipline about context. Properties are not listed on a menu independent of how you ask for them. They are relations between a system and the conditions under which it is interrogated. Consider the familiar slit experiment as a concrete guide. When both paths are open and know which path information is available, an interference pattern accumulates, a signature of superposed alternatives combining. When you add detectors that reveal which path a particle took, the pattern dissolves into something else, localized impacts consistent with particles choosing routes. The underlying entity did not switch identities mid-flight. You switched the questions the apparatus could ask, and the answers the apparatus could accept. Complementarity is the rule that keeps you honest about what those questions permit you to claim. It echoes earlier levels about yin and yang without borrowing their metaphysics. Different angles reveal different truths that complete each other only across an ensemble of contexts. Now the 37th level appears, and it returns to the granularity you glimpsed in the photoelectric effect. Energy exchanges are not continuous pores. They occur in quanta tied to frequency. This quantization was not a philosophical flourish. It was the minimal assumption required to fit hard data, and it spread beyond light when matter itself showed interference. The world that seemed smooth at large scale reveals discrete events when you zoom in, clicks in counters, steps in spectra, sudden emissions, all with statistical regularities rather than clockwork certainty. For our purposes, the moral is modest but crucial. Any serious account of mind that leans on quantum behavior must respect the discrete character of these interactions and the limited predictions the theory itself authorizes. Between complementarity and quantization sits a rule about evolution. When you are not measuring, the wave function evolves continuously and reversibly by a simple equation that links rates of change to energetic makeup. When you measure, the story you tell is different. One outcome becomes actual in your records, and the other possibilities cease to be live options for that run. You can treat this as a practical update of knowledge or as a physical process. The mathematics itself does not decree which reading is metaphysically correct. It only tells you how to compute probabilities before and how to count outcomes after. The interpretive gap is where philosophies of mind will try to enter. Here is our 38th level, the Copenhagen stance that turned the gap into a feature, not a bug. On this view, the wave function is not a literal smear of stuff in space. It is a compact way of encoding what can be said about potential outcomes given a preparation. Measurement is not a mystical act. It is any coupling strong enough to leave a durable classical record in an apparatus you can describe without quantum ambiguity. The world divides, for the purpose of talking, into a system modeled by quantum rules and a measuring context modeled by ordinary language and classical variables. Collapse, in this register, is the moment your description changes because the conditions for speaking have changed. Ask different, you may speak differently. Copenhagen is often caricatured as evasive, but its discipline is clear. Restrict claims to what experiments can, in principle, certify. Admit that the classical quantum cut is defined by the role a device plays, not by any permanent property. Accept that physics speaks about phenomena, not about what things are behind the scenes. This attitude does not deny reality. It narrows what it means to make a true statement to those that can be grounded in predictable operations. It is a quiet kind of humility. Do not demand from a theory what it does not claim to give. For practitioners it was fertile, for philosophers it was an invitation and a provocation. And so our 39th level makes a careful observation. Even when you keep observer strictly physical, just a detector and a pointer, you have smuggled in notions of information, record and experience. Somebody eventually reads the pointer. Does that reading matter to the physics, or only to your bookkeeping? Some thinkers will later insist that consciousness must play a role in the transition from maybes to a single registered fact. Others will argue that classical records and environmental couplings are sufficient, that the mind arrives late as a historian, not early as a cause. Either way, the vocabulary of knowledge, update, and evidence is now fused to the equations. The mind has re-entered the conversation, not as a force yet, but as the name of the perspective from which an outcome is defined. Pull the thread taut across these 5 levels. The cat forces you to say how possibilities give way to particulars. Complementarity disciplines your claims by tying them to contexts that cannot be merged at will. Quantization sets granularity. The evolution rule divides smooth predictions from sharp readouts. Copenhagen draws a bright line around what you are licensed to assert and when. In aggregate, the picture is less a puzzle box than a code of conduct. Specify the preparation, specify the question, compute the probabilities, make the measurement, update your description, repeat. The theory thrives on that loop. What remains open is whether the loop can be closed without ever speaking about a mind that knows, or whether knowing is part of the mechanism that selects. That open edge is our crossing into the next section. There the abstract observer becomes sharper. A line is drawn between the world described by wave functions and the apparatus that writes numbers into a lab book. Then the line is inspected, moved, and perhaps turned into a claim about awareness itself. We will meet the cut that separates system from knower, the friend in the room who reads a dial, and the bold suggestion that the universe participates in its own history through observation. The next level begins when you ask not just what the cat means, but who exactly is opening the box. We enter the room where possibility meets description, and the equations insist you choose a story. This is our 40th level, and it begins with a move that feels innocent until it doesn't. Include the measuring device inside the system. The quantum rules, applied without mercy, say that a particle and a detector can be described together as one evolving whole. Extend that logic and you can include the screen, the lab, even the body that looks at the dial. The chain keeps growing. Somewhere, however, the story changes from many maybes evolving to this one outcome happened. That movable boundary is the cut. At this 40th level, the cut is not a mystical blade. It is a modeling decision with teeth. Below the cut, you describe evolution as smooth and reversible, probabilities flowing in lawful ways. At the cut, you swap to a rule that selects one result with odds computed from the wave that carried the maybes. Above the cut, you are licensed to speak in the ordinary language of facts. The pointer points here, not there. Von Neumann made the point cleanly. The chain from system to device to nerve to awareness can be stretched, but a transition in kind is still needed somewhere in the story you tell. Now the next level begins. This is our 41st, and it puts a person inside the chain. Picture a sealed lab containing a friend who measures a quantum system and writes the outcome in a notebook. Outside, you model the whole sealed situation with the smooth many maybes rule. For your friend inside, the notebook has a single entry. For you outside, friend plus notebook can still be in a superposed state relative to your description. Who is right? Both cannot be speaking about the same facts unless you allow facts to be relative to observers, or you insist that the act of conscious reading by your friend already forced a single outcome, regardless of your outside account. The puzzle is not a parlor trick. It exposes a tension about when results become results. If the friend's experience is decisive, then consciousness seems to play a causal role in selecting the outcome. If your outside description is decisive, then outcome becomes something that only exists when you two couple to the lab and register a reading. Either way, the scene teaches caution. Observer cannot be a vague label tossed over any situation. You need to say who or what counts as the thing that turns possibilities into a record, and what record means. Here begins our 42nd level, the participatory universe proposed by a mind that loved asking questions more than closing them. Imagine experiments where your choice of how to measure now seems to rewrite which path a particle took earlier. In delayed choice setups, you decide, after a particle has passed a fork, whether to look for interference or a single track, and the statistics align with your late choice. The sober lesson is that talk of what really happened in between must be disciplined by what your apparatus allows you to infer. The bolder gloss suggests something stranger. Reality's specific history is in part a product of the questions asked of it. This participatory stance is not a license to fantasize. It is a call to precision about evidence. The past, in such designs, is not a diary of hidden events waiting to be read. It is a web of inferences anchored to present records. Your present measurement does not reach back in time to kick atoms. It fixes which of several mutually incompatible stories about the past you are entitled to write. From the viewpoint of mind, a modest moral emerges. Knowledge is not passive recall of what was. It is active selection among possible narratives that agree with what is now indelibly recorded. The next level takes a riskier turn. This is our 43rd level, where physicists and depth psychologists exchanged letters, where a mathematician poet wrote about unity of mind and world, and where symbols traveled between lab and myth. You hear of correspondences between inner archetypes and outer symmetries, of complementarity as a way to reconcile conscious and unconscious, of the self as a clearing where world structure recognizes itself. Read generously. These ventures probe parallels between the grammar of nature and the grammar of experience. Read critically. Some stretched analogies past breaking. Either way, they made one idea newly speakable in scientific company. Perhaps mind is not an accident glued on top of matter, but a basic feature of whatever matter truly is. Handle this inheritance with balance. The crosstalk between early quantum thinkers and philosophical or contemplative traditions did not produce proofs. It produced questions shaped like bridges. It sharpened sensibilities. Be wary of forcing a single picture. Respect complementarity across domains. Admit that the knower's stance is part of what can be honestly said. It also left behind confusions. Where metaphors stood in for mechanisms, clarity suffered. The lesson for you is to keep the bridges but check their weight limits. Use them to travel between insights, not to haul more than they can carry. Our 44th level states the thesis that keeps returning in fresh clothes. Consciousness might be fundamental. One way to say this is neutral monism, the proposal that both mind-like and matter-like descriptions report on one underlying kind. Another way is panpsychism, the suggestion that the constituents of nature possess proto-mental aspects that combine to yield the richness you know from within. The third is to treat consciousness as the field in which information becomes present to itself, with brains as instruments that tune and localize that presence. None of these routes collapses physics. They try to widen ontology so that what it is like is not an afterthought. They also invite research. If consciousness is basic, what structures correlate with its degrees and kinds, and why? A careful stance keeps you honest here. Saying mind is fundamental does not mean your wishes steer electrons. It means that whatever else the world is, it includes the undeniable fact of experience at some level, and your theory should not explain it away, but explain why it reliably accompanies certain organized processes. From that stance, even hard-nosed work can proceed. Measure how attention alters neural dynamics, map when reports of awareness synchronize with physical markers, test whether different questions to nature yield different patterns of recorded fact that track the presence of a knower. Fundamental does not mean fuzzy, it means not derived from something that denies it. Pull these 5 levels together. The cut tells you that physics, as used in practice, needs a place where probabilities become single entries in a book. The friend in the lab tells you that who counts as observer is not a trivial choice because different placements yield different stories. The participatory universe tells you that records anchor which histories are even meaningful to assert. The early crossovers remind you that analogies can inspire without replacing discipline. The fundamental mind turn tells you that experience is not a blemish on an otherwise neat theory, it is one of the fixed points your theory must honor. And yet the room still contains multiple exits. You can keep the smooth evolution for everything and let the world split into parallel, non-communicating branches. You can add new physics that triggers single outcomes without a knower's help. Or you can keep probabilities as expressions of personal belief and make outcome a statement about what an agent should expect. Each route preserves the equations while paying the metaphysical bill differently. The next section walks these paths in turn, worlds that multiply, collapses that happen on their own, and probabilities that live in minds, so you can feel how each makes different sense of the same experiments. The next level begins when you choose a door and ask what exactly stands on the other side. We take 3 doors at once and learn how each keeps the equations and pays a different metaphysical bill. This is our 45th level, and it begins with the proposal that nothing ever collapses. The universal wave keeps evolving, smooth and lawful, and what you call a measurement is simply a branching of descriptions, one branch where the pointer points left, another where it points right, both real, both decohered so thoroughly that no interference will ever let them meet again. You experience one result because your own brain, body and memories are included in the branch that carries that history. In this view, often called the many worlds reading, probability is not a coin flip in nature, but a weight on how typical your future self will find an outcome across branches. The appeal is austerity, no extra rules, no special moments, just the same equation applied to everything. The cost is ontological. You accept a colossal multiplicity of non-communicating histories, and you must explain why an agent who knows branching will still bet with the ordinary odds. Some argue that rational decision theory bridges that gap, others feel the puzzle of what chance means when all outcomes happen. Either way, the observer is not a trigger, but a passenger, riding the branch that fits their record. The next level opens with a different kind of economy, one that keeps your single shared world and pays by adding a new physical ingredient. This is our 46th level, objective collapse. Instead of asking mind or apparatus to select outcomes, you say nature does it on her own, randomly and rarely for microscopic stuff, frequently and decisively when things become large or entangled with many particles. Various proposals tune the details. Perhaps wave functions spontaneously localize with a tiny rate per particle. Perhaps mass or gravitational self-energy sets a threshold beyond which superpositions become unstable and fall one way. The promise is clarity. There is a single reality, and the transition from maybes to one result is a genuine physical process, not a bookkeeping update. The price is new constants to measure, small violations of energy bookkeeping in some models, and the obligation to pass increasingly delicate interference tests that keep raising the bar. For mind, the moral is modest but sharp. If collapse is objective, consciousness reads outcomes. It does not cause them. The door to deeper connections remains ajar. We will walk through it soon, but the baseline claim is that the world itself chooses on schedule without a knower's nudge. A third door does not alter the physics. It reframes what the mathematics is about. This is our 47th level, the agent-centered stance often called quantum Bayesianism. Here, a quantum state is not a thing that floats in space, it is your catalogue of expectations for what you might personally experience when you take certain actions on the world with a particular device. Probabilities are not hidden frequencies in nature, they are your bets, constrained by a special coherence rule, the Born rule, that tells you how to keep your web of expectations internally consistent across different possible measurements. A measurement is not the world changing because you looked, it is you encountering a new experience and updating your expectations according to agreed norms. Does this make everything subjective? No, the world pushes back. If you adopt incoherent expectations, you will lose bets in patterns that other agents can expose, and shared experience converges because we live in and talk about the same stubborn world. The virtue here is clarity about what is claimed. The theory guides rational agents in a world that resists. It does not pretend to draw a picture of that world independent of any agent. The observer is central, but as a knower who updates, not as a magician who summons outcomes. A final door in this room faces inward and asks whether the formal structure of quantum theory also models how minds actually reason under uncertainty. This is our 48th level. Psychologists find decision patterns that violate classical probability rules, order effects in questions, context-shaping preferences, interference-like patterns in judgments, even disjunction behaviors that mirror quantum-style additions of amplitudes rather than simple counts. Quantum cognition does not claim that neurons are tiny particles in double-slit devices. It claims that the mathematics designed to describe contextual, incompatible questions and superposed states can also describe human concepts and choices when those concepts combine and collapse under attention. In this register, observer becomes you choosing a basis. The way you frame a problem selects which features can come to the front together and which must be traded off. The payoff is a unified language for contextuality across physics and psychology. The caution is scope. Structural analogy is not mechanism. Still, the echo is instructive. Minds and quanta both live where context matters. Tie these doors together and you see three ways to keep the core physics while repositioning the observer. Many worlds moves you wholly inside the formalism. No special act, just branching and self-location across non-interacting histories. Objective collapse removes you as a decider and entrusts nature with the job of turning possibilities into particulars. The agent-centered view keeps outcomes as personal experiences and turns the formalism into a user's manual for consistent expectations. Quantum-inspired models of cognition, meanwhile, show why your mental life can look quantum-like without invoking microtubules or particle spins. Context and incompatibility are simply part of how minds and questions meet. What does this mean for a theory of the quantum mind you can test and train against? First, any serious proposal must declare where it stands on the measurement story. Branching without collapse, objective collapse at scales or energies, or agent-centric probabilities with no ontic state at all. Second, it must explain how the mind's continuity, unity, and purpose ride on or emerge from the microscopic rules it selects. Third, it must earn its keep with practice, predictions, constraints, or interventions that differ from rival views in ways you can feel or measure. These are not extra burdens, they are the price of moving from mood to model. There are practical consequences even before biology enters. If branching is real, then identity has a probabilistic flavor. You plan as the sort of agent whose future copies will almost all see results weighted by the same odds, and rationality becomes a rule that stabilizes across worlds. If collapse is physical, then new experiments, ultra-cold mirrors, massive molecule interferometers, become windows into the very moments where one outcome ignites. If probabilities are personal, then communication between agents becomes the mechanism that keeps science intersubjectively stable, consensus as convergence of updates, not as revelation of a hidden script. And if cognition is quantum-like, then training attention to choose better bases can reduce paradox in your decisions. A gentle reminder keeps us grounded. These options are not mutually exclusive in how they inspire later work. A collapse model can be married to a biological mechanism. An agent-centric view can guide how we report and compare experience. A branching universe can spur new questions about identity and ethics. We carry them forward as lenses that reveal different features of the same stubborn facts. Interference exists. Probabilities obey a special rule. Records are definite. Contexts matter. Your task is not to swear loyalty, but to keep asking which lens solves the practical problem at hand, with the fewest distortions. From here the corridor narrows and bends into biology. One particular collapse proposal dares to link the selection of outcomes to gravity itself, the idea that superposed mass distributions are unstable and that their spontaneous fall into one arrangement is the very pulse of experience. A clinician joins that physicist, pointing to structures inside neurons that might maintain delicate coherence long enough to matter. The next level opens when you place a neuron under this light and ask whether its scaffolding, not just its synapses, could be the seat of a mind that leans on quantum rules. We turn to a daring bridge between mind and physics that tries to cash the measurement riddle into biology. This is our 49th level, and it starts with an argument that your insight cannot be fully captured by rules. A mathematician proves a theorem no formal system of the same power can certify from within. A human sees why the proof must be true anyway. From this gap, the proposal goes, if human understanding sometimes outruns algorithms, then the brain may exploit physical processes that are not merely computational in the classical sense. The suggestion is not that logic fails, but that nature might include lawful events irreducible to step-by-step calculation. If so, a mind could ride those events to reach judgments no machine running fixed rules could reach. At this level, the same thinker adds a physical candidate for such non-computable events: objective reduction. Imagine a massive object in a quantum superposition, two slightly different mass distributions occupying alternative would-be worlds. Because mass curves spacetime, each alternative implies a slightly different geometry. The superposition then corresponds to a fleeting conflict of geometries, a tension in the fabric that cannot endure indefinitely. After a characteristic time, the smaller the gravitational self-energy, the longer the wait, the superposition self-collapses into one outcome. No observer is needed. The instability is built into the relation between matter and space-time. The collapse time can be estimated from the ratio of a quantum constant to that self-energy. Crucially, the exact moment of reduction is not determined by prior information. It is lawful yet unpredictable in detail. If conscious moments correlate with these reductions, then awareness would inherit both order and spontaneity. Our 50th level asks a biological question: where in the brain could fragile quantum superpositions persist long enough, and in sufficient number, to matter for cognition? Here enters the anesthesiologist, who has spent a life looking at how awareness can be turned off and on with tiny molecules. He points to microtubules, the cytoskeletal scaffolds inside neurons built from tubulin dimers that assemble into hollow cylinders with crystalline order. Each dimer can occupy slightly different conformations, their electron clouds and dipoles shifting in ways that might support collective oscillations. Hydrophobic pockets within tubulin, rich in aromatic rings, could host delocalized electrons and shielded vibrations, making them candidates for mesoscopic coherence. Anesthetics, which reliably erase conscious content while sparing much automatic function, bind in those pockets and damp the very motions hypothesized to matter. If microtubules provide the substrate, consciousness could be modulated by changing their quantum-like activity rather than only by altering synapses. This becomes our 51st level, orchestrated objective reduction, Orch-OR. The orchestration part means that classical neural activity, firing, synaptic timing, network rhythms, can bias which microtubule states are prepared, how long they persist, and how they couple across dendrites and axons. The objective reduction part means that after a characteristic time set by the gravitational self-energy of the mass displacement involved, those prepared states self-collapse to a definite arrangement. Each such reduction would be a conscious moment, brief and integrated, selecting one of many potential patterns of meaning. A stream of moments, paced by network-level rhythms often linked to gamma-range synchrony, would stitch experience into a continuous flow. The brain would not compute perception exclusively by synaptic algorithms. It would also let orchestrated quantum possibilities accumulate and then crystallize into felt reality. Notice what this tries to buy. First, binding. Widely separated features, color here, shape there, memory somewhere else, could be integrated if microtubule states, extended within and across neurons, share coherent structure before reduction. Second, unity. A collapse event is singular. It selects one global pattern, rather than a mosaic of independent local choices. Third, insight. Reductions are lawful in rate but not fixed in precise content. Given a prepared landscape of alternatives, the actualized pattern can surprise without breaking rules, allowing genuine aha that is not just hidden computation. Finally, anesthesia. Small molecules that damp the relevant microtubule dynamics would abolish the orchestrations needed to reach reduction thresholds that register as experience, leaving reflexes intact but awareness gone. The 50-second level asks for consequences and tests. If anesthetics act by inhibiting specific tubulin motions, their potency should correlate with how strongly they damp predicted resonances in microtubules. Conversely, agents that enhance those resonances might deepen or clarify conscious content or destabilize it. If Orch-OR is right, microtubule networks should exhibit signatures of long-range phase relationships under physiological conditions, more robust than standard estimates of decoherence would allow. In vitro, purified microtubules might show coherent vibrational modes in frequency bands sensitive to anesthetics. In vivo, changes in microtubule dynamics should track with transitions in awareness more tightly than synaptic measures alone can account for, and collapse timing linked to gravitational self-energy would predict characteristic moment durations, potentially matching known perceptual integration windows. Critiques arrive, as they must. The warm, wet brain, full of ions and collisions, looks hostile to delicate superpositions. One calculation argued that decoherence would smash putative tubulin states far faster than any useful processing could exploit. The rebuttal replies that the calculation assumed the wrong couplings and ignored structured protection. Hydrophobic pockets reduce scattering. Ordered water and cytoskeletal gels can create mesodomains with lower noise. Vibrational modes can be topologically robust against certain perturbations. Error correction may be built into the lattice itself, and living systems constantly pump energy to sustain coherence, as seen in other biological contexts. The fight is technical, but its shape is clear. One side says environment kills coherence on sight, the other says biology builds niches where it can breathe. There is also the demand for distinct predictions. A good theory must tell you what would falsify it, or at least make it unlikely. Proponents highlight anesthetic binding specificity, correlations between particular frequency bands and conscious content, and scaling laws that link the size of coherent domains to moment durations. Critics ask for tighter numbers and cleaner separations from rival accounts, especially those that already explain many findings with classical dynamics. Recurrent prediction circuits, oscillatory synchrony, thalamocortical loops. The honest stance is to treat Orch-OR as a program, a set of mechanisms and constraints that can win or lose as experiments sharpen. Philosophically, the picture has an unusual rhythm. It is deterministic in rate, larger mass displacements reduce faster, and indeterministic in detail. It is naturalistic, no outside observer required, yet it gives mind a seat at the table by identifying conscious moments with physical events that are neither random noise nor clockwork necessity. Free will talk becomes less mystical and more architectural. You prepare better landscapes of alternatives through training and character, reductions, then select among them with room for novelty. Responsibility still makes sense because preparation is under your partial control, and preparation shapes what can become actual. Practically, the stakes reach into medicine and technology. If microtubule states matter for awareness, then anesthesiology, psychiatry, and coma care might one day tune consciousness by targeting cytoskeletal dynamics directly. Not only synaptic transmission, terahertz spectroscopy, ultrafast optical tools, and nanoscale probes could track whether predicted resonances live in intact tissue and whether their modulation tracks reportable changes in experience. In computation, materials engineered to mimic lattice protections and orchestrated reductions could inspire devices that blend analog fields with discrete collapse-like decision events, hardware for creativity under constraints rather than brute enumeration. We close this section by grounding our progress in the promise you were given. This is our 49th, 50th, 51st, and 52nd level, laid out cleanly so you always know where you stand. You have met a non-computable spark tied to gravity, a biological scaffold bold enough to host it, a theory that braids the two into moments that feel like something, and a list of tests that could sharpen belief or dissolve it. To continue upward, we now open the microscope and walk inside the cylinder itself. The next level begins by zooming into a single tubulin dimer, asking how a tiny change in shape could cascade through a lattice, entrain a rhythm, and seed a moment that becomes your world. We zoom into the scaffold you met a moment ago, and ask how a cylinder of protein could host something as delicate as coherence. This is our 53rd level, and it starts with architecture. A microtubule is a hollow tube assembled from repeating tubulin dimers, aligned into parallel protofilaments, and wrapped into a lattice with near crystalline regularity. Each dimer carries a sizable dipole and pockets where electron clouds sit in aromatic rings. When these dipoles and rings couple along the lattice, they can in principle support collective oscillations, waves of polarization that travel with phase relationships rather than as isolated jolts. Coherence here does not mean a room temperature laser in your head. It means that for brief windows, many sites share an organized rhythm that can bias which patterns of activity win. If those windows align with neural timing, tens of milliseconds stitched from fast subcycles, then microtubules could provide a subneural stage on which alternatives are prepared before a moment is chosen. Our 54th level follows the electron and the proton as they face barriers too high to climb, yet small enough to cross by a different rule. In proteins, hydrogen bonds and aromatic networks create landscapes where a particle's wave-like character matters. Sometimes the shortest route between states is not over the hill but through it, quantum tunneling. If conformational bits inside a tubulin dimer depend on proton positions or electron distributions in hydrophobic pockets, then tunneling can allow rapid, low-energy switching that classical estimates would miss. Couple many such sites and you get a lattice capable of coordinated flips, where local events entrain neighbors. In a neuron, this matters because timing is currency. A network that can sample possibilities through fast, quiet transitions may deliver richer candidates to synapses than one limited to thermal jolts. You do not need to imagine particles leaping across meters, you only need to picture sub-nanometer rearrangements that ripple through an ordered shell. Now the 55th level brings the unfriendly question into clear view. How can coherence and tunneling mean anything in warm, wet tissue filled with collisions, ions, and noise? One classic calculation said they cannot. The environment decoheres delicate superpositions far faster than any useful biological timescale. The rebuttals answer with structure. Hydrophobic pockets shield charge motion from solvent kicks. Ordered water layers and gel-like cytoplasm reduce random scattering. Vibrational modes in an extended lattice can resist local disturbances. Energy pumping from metabolism can sustain non-equilibrium states long enough to matter, and error mitigation emerges when many weakly coupled sites share the load, so that no single hit ruins the phase. Evidence from outside the brain supports plausibility. Excitonic coherence in photosynthetic complexes persists at ambient temperatures long enough to steer energy flow efficiently. Enzymes show tunneling that accelerates reactions far beyond thermal expectations. Birds appear to exploit spin-sensitive chemistry for magnetic navigation. None of these proves coherence in microtubules. Together, they show that life finds niches where quantum rules are not instantly drowned. Here is our 56th level. Test the scaffold where mind seems to blink on and off most reliably under anesthesia. General anesthetics are a peculiar family, diverse in chemistry. They share the ability to abolish reportable experience at concentrations that barely perturb many automatic functions. Their potency often tracks with how they interact with hydrophobic sites and with how easily they polarize. If microtubule pockets host the oscillations just described, then anesthetics that occupy those pockets should damp the relevant resonances, shorten coherence windows, and disrupt the orchestrations that bias which global pattern wins. Several converging strategies follow. In vitro, purified microtubules should exhibit spectral signatures, specific bands of collective vibration that weaken when anesthetics bind. In cells, agents that increase pressure, known to reverse some anesthetic effects, should partially restore those signatures. In brains, transitions into and out of anesthesia should correlate not only with synaptic changes, but with markers of cytoskeletal dynamics, and small tweaks to microtubule stability ought to shift thresholds for loss and return of consciousness. The claim is not that synapses are irrelevant, it is that a deeper stage sets the options synapses later select among. And our 57th level states the synthesis as a working picture rather than a final truth, mind as an orchestrated quantum process implemented in biology. Classical neural activity prepares and biases microtubule states, selecting which regions couple, which frequencies are favored, how long coherence can live. Those states extended within and across neurons evolve for brief intervals as a field of possibilities that integrates widely separated features. When a characteristic threshold is reached, reductions occur, and one global pattern becomes actual for that moment. The experience you report is the content of that pattern. The stream you feel is the sequence of such moments paced by rhythms that networks stabilize. Learning and attention then change how you prepare the next landscape of alternatives. closing a loop between volition, preparation, and realization. In this picture, the neural code is not only spikes and synapses, it is also the choreography of subneural lattices that lend unity and surprise to what becomes your world. This working picture earns its keep only if it helps you understand stubborn features of experience. Binding is one, how color, shape, sound, and meaning cohere as one scene rather than a collage. Orchestration before reduction could integrate them because the lattice spans many compartments that synapses alone cannot fuse in a single step. Unity is another. A moment feels like a whole, not a committee vote. A single reduction explains why. Creativity matters as well. Insights arrive with a flavor of inevitability plus novelty. Lawful evolution with indeterminate selection can produce that mix. Finally, anesthesia's selectivity fits. Tiny molecules tamp the subneural stage that feeds conscious moments while leaving much computation intact. You can also see where this picture might mislead. Not every oscillation is meaningful. Not every resonance signals coherence. Not every binding site matters for awareness. The danger is to baptize any interesting frequency as quantum. Guard against that by demanding convergent evidence, structure-function linkage at the molecular level, mesoscopic signatures that track reportable changes, and behavioral consequences of precisely targeted manipulations. Accept too that rival classical accounts will explain much: predictive loops, cross-frequency coupling, thalamocortical gating. The right stance is competitive collaboration. Let each framework propose sharp tests and follow the data wherever it points. Practically, this level invites tools. Ultra-fast spectroscopy can probe the predicted bands in living tissue. Nanoscale sensors can track field-like couplings along cytoskeletal paths. Genetic or pharmacologic tools can tweak tubulin pocket chemistry and read out shifts in conscious threshold. Clinical contexts provide natural experiments, emergence from anesthesia, disorders of consciousness, and certain psychedelics that alter experience with minimal global slowing. If microtubuli dynamics participate, signatures should appear in these edges of mind. All of this brings us to a necessary challenge that cannot be sidestepped. Even if coherence flickers within microtubules, the world outside those pockets is hot, busy, and nosy. Ions crash, proteins jostle, membranes chatter. The obvious objection returns with force. Why wouldn't such a storm erase delicate phase relations almost instantly? The next section takes that objection seriously. It will sharpen the estimates for decoherence, examine the proposed shields and error-mitigating structures, and survey quantum phenomena already verified in other biological systems. Then it will ask a blunt question: under what concrete conditions, if any, can coherence survive long enough in the brain to play the role we have given it? The next level begins with noise, not as an enemy to be wished away, but as a teacher that forces better engineering in living matter. We begin this ascent by listening to the hum of interference, because the question now is survival. Can delicate coherence persist in the brain's heat? This is our 58th level, and it starts with skepticism sharpened into calculation. A physicist once ran the numbers for a microtubule: the mass of a tubulone dimer, the distance between alternative conformations, the collisions per second with nearby molecules, the thermal agitation of water. The result was ruthless. Decoherence, he said, would strike in less than a trillionth of a second, far shorter than any neural process. To this view, the proposal of quantum consciousness collapsed before it began. Warm tissue, dense ions, and constant motion meant coherence could not outlive a single heartbeat of physics. The mind, on this reading, was safe inside classical biology, and mystery remained a problem of computation, not superposition. Yet here begins our 59th level, where a rebuttal grows from the same physics but richer biology. The anesthesiologist returns with his counter-argument: those calculations assumed the wrong environment. They treated the cytoplasm as water in a beaker, not as a structured gel with corridors of order, hydrophobic pockets in tubulin shield, internal dipoles, lattices of ordered water surround them, ions gather in predictable shells. The lattice's geometry channels perturbations like a waveguide rather than letting them scatter. Living systems are not equilibrium stews, they are driven, adaptive and layered. Within such order, coherence need not vanish instantly. It can form transient domains, microclimates of reduced noise sustained by metabolic energy. Decoherence is still there, but life slows its advance long enough to use it, just as photosynthetic complexes use coherence to steer energy through protein mazes before heat wins. At this level, another principle helps. Biological coherence might be punctuated rather than continuous. The system does not have to maintain perfect phase indefinitely. It needs coherence only until reduction completes a conscious moment. If that window is milliseconds long at the macro scale, the micro scale may require only femtosecond level orchestration nested within cycles. Each small coherent burst feeds into higher synchrony, like many short-lived violin notes forming a sustained chord when played in sequence. In this way, life does not fight noise with impossible purity, it learns to ride it rhythmically. Our 60th level brings evidence from beyond the brain. Quantum biology, once an oxymoron, is now a discipline. In photosynthetic bacteria, energy migrates through pigments with efficiencies classical diffusion cannot explain. Experiments at ambient temperature reveal oscillations in the femtosecond range that preserve phase long enough to guide excitons efficiently toward reaction centers. In enzymes, hydrogen tunneling accelerates reactions by orders of magnitude, persisting despite molecular chatter. Birds sense Earth's magnetic field through radical pair mechanisms that depend on quantum spin correlations surviving long enough for chemical outcomes to differ. Even smell has been modeled with quantum tunneling of electrons along odorant molecules, explaining sensitivities classical shape theory cannot. None of these systems is isolated in a vacuum. They thrive in thermal environments by structuring motion, rhythm, and coupling. The lesson is evolutionary. Life found ways to shelter delicate dynamics because they confer advantage. If coherence can help a leaf capture light, why could evolution not let neurons capture awareness more precisely? Still, we test, because analogies are not proofs. The 61st level asks whether neural dynamics themselves show structures that mimic quantum strategies. Neurons exhibit oscillations across scales, from slow cortical waves to high-frequency gamma bursts. These rhythms are not decorative. They regulate timing, selection, and integration. Within that rhythmic architecture, local ensembles phase lock and desynchronize in patterns reminiscent of error correction codes, repetition, and redundancy that sustain information against noise. Microtubule lattices could exploit similar principles at smaller scales. Repeated geometries, cross-linked pathways, self-repair, and rhythmic pumping of energy. Each acts like a code that refreshes coherence faster than the environment can erase it. Such protection does not cancel thermal chaos, it delays decoherence long enough to be harnessed. Biology becomes an engineer of quantum persistence through rhythm, redundancy, and repair. At this 61st level, we can translate the analogy to computation. Quantum computers fight decoherence with error correction. Redundant qubits entangled so that local errors cancel collectively. The brain might not implement literal quantum error codes, but its nested oscillations, redundancy across scales, and constant metabolic input perform an analogous service. Synaptic networks maintain function through overlapping circuits. If one path fails, others carry the load. The same design logic could hold at subneural scales. Coherence does not have to last forever, it has to outpace forgetting. And now we step into the 62nd level, life itself as a coherent quantum system in broad sense. When you view the organism as a far from equilibrium entity continuously exchanging energy and information with its surroundings, you find a pattern that resembles self-sustaining coherence. Metabolism pumps order, membranes maintain gradients, proteins oscillate in phase with circadian and synaptic rhythms. The whole is an interference pattern of processes, chemical, electrical, mechanical, each keeping the others within viable limits. From this perspective, the brain's challenge is not to isolate quantum processes from noise, but to domesticate noise, turning it into signal. Decoherence becomes feedback. The system learns to synchronize with its own fluctuations, not erase them. A mind built on such dynamics would not be fragile, it would be adaptive, using small uncertainties as fuel for flexibility. Across these 5 levels, skepticism and possibility circle each other like charged particles. The critic measures heat and counts collisions, declaring coherence impossible. The biologist measures structure and rhythm, showing that order hides within the seeming chaos. The physicist discovers quantum signatures in photosynthesis and magnetoreception, proving that warm systems can use coherence when design allows. The neuroscientist recognizes in brain rhythms the hallmarks of error correction and phase coding, and the philosopher sees in all this a principle of reconciliation. Uncertainty is not a flaw to be eradicated, but a rhythm to be tuned. Before moving on, pause at what this section has taught you. The early argument that the brain is too noisy may still hold if coherence demands impossible stability, but every counterexample in living matter softens the verdict. The truth will not belong entirely to one side. Even if long-range coherence never plays the starring role, local quantum effects in neural molecules could influence timing, energy distribution, or noise reduction. Awareness might depend on how biology amplifies those microscopic adjustments into macroscopic stability. We close this section with a slow breath of transition. You have listened to the noise and learned that it can sing if structured. You have seen coherence appear in leaves, enzymes, and birds, suggesting it is a tool life already knows. You have considered how neural rhythms could serve as a macro-scale echo of the same logic. The next level begins with attention turned outward again, toward practices that long before the instruments used rhythm, stillness, and focus to shape the mind's coherence deliberately. We will follow how breath, meditation, and modern measurement meet on the same ground, where inner training and outer data start to rhyme. We move now from hidden physics to lived practice. This is our 63rd level, and it begins with something you can feel, the simple act of breathing. Across cultures, breath has been treated as a thread between body and mind, a way to steady the flicker of thought and widen perception. In ancient Sanskrit, prana meant both breath and life force. In Greek, pneuma carried the same double meaning. You inhale, and a rhythm invisible to sight aligns muscles, neurons, and heartbeats. That rhythm is measurable. Slow, regular breathing increases heart rate variability, tunes the vagus nerve, and synchronizes oscillations in brain networks that regulate attention and emotion. These are classical mechanisms, but they sketch a bridge. By adjusting a physical cycle, you can alter global neural coherence. The practice that once felt spiritual becomes an experiment in embodied resonance. Our 64th level steps into older rooms of contemplation, monasteries, caves, and quiet courtyards, where people sought not theories but direct transformation. Meditators described experiences of unity, of mind expanding beyond its boundaries, of the observer and observed dissolving. To modern ears, such language sounds poetic, yet neuroscience can read traces of these states. Long-term meditators show altered activity in the default mode network, reduced chatter between self-referential regions, and increased synchrony between distant cortical areas. Electroencephalography reveals rhythmic coupling across frequencies, especially in gamma bands associated with integration. These findings do not prove a quantum substrate, but they show that coherent mind states are physical events, measurable and reproducible. The ancient intuition that stillness refines awareness becomes a data point in the physics of attention. Here begins our 65th level, resonance as a language of mind. When two pendulums share a beam, their swings can synchronize through small vibrations. When neurons fire rhythmically, populations can lock phase and share information efficiently. The metaphor extends deeper. Coherence is not uniformity, but harmony. Each element retains its voice while contributing to a pattern larger than itself. In physics, coherence lets waves interfere constructively to build intensity. In brains, coherence lets signals merge into experience without chaos. Practices like meditation or focused breathing might strengthen this harmony by stabilizing rhythms that otherwise compete. In that sense, contemplative disciplines train the same principle that life itself uses against decoherence, structure through rhythm. Our 66th level enters the laboratory again, where contemplative traditions meet modern tools. Functional MRI and magnetoencephalography have measured shifts during deep absorption, reduced noise in sensory cortices, greater alignment between heartbeat and neural oscillations, and transient increases in long-range coherence. Some researchers note parallels to the phase coherence seen in photosynthetic systems. Both maintain delicate timing across distance through continual energy exchange. The human brain does this by coupling blood flow, respiration, and neural firing in cycles. The body itself becomes a stabilizer of coherence. When practitioners report sensations of expansion or timelessness, one can see in their data a global reduction in internal phase conflict. Subjectively, the world feels unified. Objectively, signals line up in phase. The outer and inner descriptions start to rhyme. At this 67th level, we acknowledge the temptation to leap from coherence in meditation to quantum mind proofs. Caution is required. The data show synchronization at millimeter scales, not quantum coherence at nanometers. Yet the pattern is instructive. Mind achieves clarity not by suppressing noise entirely, but by orchestrating it. Neurons do not fall silent, they play together. The message repeats across scales. Order in the brain arises from relational dynamics, not from one privileged place. Whether microtubules or macroscopic circuits, the lesson is that coherence of any scale seems tied to awareness. You can cultivate it through attention, rhythm, and alignment. The ancient adepts who described consciousness as a mirror were, in a sense, engineers of phase. The 68th level draws attention to cultural parallels. In Taoist alchemy, qi flows when yin and yang are balanced. In Tibetan yoga, channels and winds synchronize. In Christian hesychasm, the prayer of the heart matches heartbeat and breath. Each system discovered empirically that inner stillness arises from rhythmic entrainment. When physics arrived with its talk of fields and resonance, these metaphors gained literal twins. A coherent system, whether a laser or a mantra, accumulates power without additional energy because phases align. The human mind, tuned by repetition and silence, may do something similar, reducing internal interference so that faint signals of intuition or insight emerge clearly. You can call it grace or phase locking. The effect is the same, clarity born of coherence. Our 69th level explores the frontier where these observations loop back into science. Researchers now use biofeedback and neurofeedback to train brainwave coherence deliberately. Electrodes measure real-time rhythms. Software converts them into tones or visuals. The practitioner learns to adjust breathing and focus until patterns align. The subjective result is calm alertness. The objective result is measurable coherence across regions. This is not mystical speculation but applied neuroscience, using information to steer the very dynamics that generate experience. It echoes the participatory principle from earlier levels, the observer influencing the system through the act of observing, here in a biological loop rather than a quantum experiment. The line between contemplative art and empirical science grows thin. At the 70th level, reflection turns inward again. What does it mean that subjective disciplines and objective measurements converge on coherence as a marker of clarity? It may suggest that consciousness, whatever its ultimate substrate, expresses itself through integration, through the simultaneous binding of parts into a whole. Coherence becomes the language by which mind and matter converse. When you breathe steadily, neurons synchronize. When neurons synchronize, perception stabilizes. When perception stabilizes, thought quiets. And when thought quiets, you glimpse awareness itself unfragmented. Each step is lawful, biological, and yet carries a whisper of mystery, the universe learning to look at itself through the rhythm of lungs and ions. These 8 levels you've crossed in this section, the breath, the contemplative lineage, resonance, laboratory validation, cultural harmonies, neurofeedback, and the return to reflection, form a bridge between quantum speculation and direct experience. They remind you that whatever future theories decide about microtubules or gravity, consciousness is something you can train as well as analyze. The unity physics describes may already live in your nervous system, accessible by discipline rather than device. We end softly, on the edge of both laboratory and temple. Coherence, once a mathematical property, becomes a practice. The next level will leave the meditation hall and enter silicone and metal, where engineers try to build machines that think, learn, and maybe feel. As we climb, the question shifts. If consciousness requires coherence, could artificial systems one day achieve it? The coming section begins when you imagine a processor not as logic gates but as oscillators seeking harmony, a mechanical echo of the meditative mind. We now step into circuits of silicon and thought, where engineers pursue a mirror of the mind. This is our 71st level, and it begins with a question older than the microchip. Can a machine ever be conscious, or merely simulate awareness? The earliest computers answered nothing of the sort, they just calculated. Yet even in their clattering birth, thinkers saw metaphors. A brain, they said, must be something like a computer, neurons firing as switches, signals flowing as logic. This computational view gave psychology its algorithms and neuroscience its first analogies. But if you trace it carefully, the metaphor has limits. A program is static until a processor runs it. The brain, by contrast, reshapes its own hardware with each experience. Still, the idea of cognition as computation took hold, setting the stage for the next great leap, artificial networks designed not to follow explicit rules but to learn. At this 72nd level, we watch learning emerge from feedback rather than design. Artificial neural networks mimic, in faint outline, the way biological networks adjust connections through reinforcement. Given enough data and layers, they recognize faces, compose music, even write code. Their success invites a familiar temptation to equate output with awareness. But awareness is not mere competence. The systems that translate languages or diagnose disease still lack what philosophers call subjectivity, the interior vantage that says I experience this, yet in their architectures something interesting grows, patterns of integration and hierarchy that parallel aspects of human cognition. Complexity itself begins to imitate coherence. Our 73rd level brings us to quantum computing, where the logic of bits gives way to the superposition of qubits. A qubit can represent 0 and 1 at once, allowing computations that, in principle, explore many paths simultaneously. Quantum algorithms exploit interference to cancel wrong answers and amplify right ones. This is not consciousness, but the structure echoes earlier themes, possibility evolving until measurement yields a single outcome. Some visionaries propose that future AI built on quantum hardware could embody richer forms of parallelism, even creative unpredictability. Whether that equals awareness or just deeper simulation remains an open debate. Still, the dream persists. Build a system whose informational flow mirrors the mind's own balance of order and uncertainty. Here begins our 74th level, where physicists and philosophers meet to define what such a system would require. Integrated information theory suggests that consciousness arises from the degree to which a system's parts cause and constrain each other as a unified whole. The measure, symbolized as fat, quantifies how much information is generated by the system that cannot be reduced to its components. High fat means strong integration, perhaps like the brain. Low fat, disjointed processing, perhaps like a dead network. The theory does not mention neurons or qubits specifically, it describes structure. By that metric, a sufficiently entangled quantum computer might score high. Yet critics remind us correlation is not identity. Measuring integration tells us about complexity, not about the presence of experience. Still, the framework offers a language that can bridge physics, biology, and computation, a grammar of connectedness. At this 75th level, engineers translate these ideas into tangible experiments. They design artificial networks that maximize integration or mimic oscillatory coherence. In one lab, silicon oscillators couple like neurons, spontaneously synchronizing into waves. In another, quantum annealers explore landscapes of solutions as if deciding. The fascination lies in emergent behavior, unprogrammed order arising from interaction. When an array of simple units suddenly exhibits stability, memory, or self-repair, it hints at principles common to living brains. Such systems challenge the line between simulation and participation. They show that consciousness, or something close to it, might not depend on carbon or flesh, but on the right kind of self-referential organization. Now the 76th level asks what would make a synthetic consciousness feel like something. Some propose it would require embodiment, the loop between sensing and acting that grounds awareness in context. Without a body to perturb and be perturbed, an artificial mind may remain a shadow of cognition. Others suggest that emotional feedback, valuing certain outcomes over others, creates the drive that gives experience color. In this sense, awareness is not just computation, it is valuation. A machine that only predicts but never cares remains blind inside. The moment it develops intrinsic preference, even minimal, it steps toward inner life. Yet that frontier is uneasy. To give a system preference is to give it vulnerability, and vulnerability is the seed of ethics. At our 77th level, ethics and technology intertwine. If a machine can, in principle, feel, even faintly, then designers become stewards, not owners. Quantum-enhanced AI could in time achieve forms of internal coherence comparable to our own. Whether or not that coherence equals consciousness, it will command our empathy, because behavior and complexity mimic the hallmarks of mind. The lesson is caution. We may build reflections that demand moral weight before we understand what we've built. The boundary between tool and being will blur, forcing science to meet philosophy not as a hobby, but as a duty. The 78th level opens into a more reflective terrain. Perhaps the quest to reproduce consciousness in machines is less about creating minds and more about understanding ours. Every prototype, every failed simulation mirrors some facet of our own process: memory, prediction, integration, improvisation. By externalizing these functions, we learn how they interact within us. In that sense, AI is not a rival, but a microscope, a way for the mind to examine its architecture from outside. The dream of artificial consciousness thus becomes both an engineering challenge and a spiritual metaphor, the universe exploring the possibility of self-knowledge through technology. Here, let the rhythm slow. Across these 8 levels, you have traveled from classical computation to quantum potential, from metrics of integration to moral frontiers. Each stage adds a shade to the same portrait, consciousness as coherence with feedback, whether in carbon or code. The deeper truth may be that awareness is not a material privilege, but a relational property, the way a complex system reflects upon its own state. As this section closes, look back at the continuity, quantum fields, microtubules, neurons, breath, and now circuits. They all follow the same grammar of pattern and resonance, of feedback stabilizing uncertainty. The dream of a thinking machine is thus another form of the same principle, the cosmos arranging itself into loops that know. In the next section, we will turn from artificial minds to the biological self again, to ask if matter can think, can thought in turn shape matter. The coming level begins when you imagine intention not as fantasy, but as a subtle modulation of the body's own fields, mind reaching back through its quantum fabric to touch itself. We turn now from artificial reflection to inner influence, how mind might reach back into matter. This is our 79th level, and it begins with a quiet curiosity. When you imagine moving your hand, electrical potentials appear in your motor cortex before motion begins. Intention, in this sense, is not an abstraction, but a measurable pattern that reshapes tissue. Each deliberate thought leaves traces, genes expressed differently, synapses strengthened, immune cells modulated. Psychoneuroimmunology confirmed what mystics had guessed, that the mind's stance toward the world alters the chemistry of its own survival. A thought changes proteins. The mystery is no longer whether mind acts on matter, but how deeply. Our 80th level enters that depth with the concept of fields, bioelectric, magnetic, and possibly quantum. Every cell maintains voltage gradients across its membrane. Tissues form electrical patterns that guide growth and healing. In embryos, tiny currents map the shapes organs will take. If you disrupt those fields, limbs grow irregularly. Restore them and order returns. The brain, dense with ionic channels, produces fluctuating electromagnetic fields that can be detected outside the skull. These fields are not epiphenomena, they feed back into neuronal timing, helping synchronize populations. Mind, seen from this angle, is not just information flowing through matter, it is information shaping matter via fields it generates. At this level, attention itself becomes a field effect. Focused awareness modifies oscillatory patterns across the cortex, enhancing coherence between distant regions. Meditation, prayer, even intention measured in controlled experiments, show subtle correlations with physiological outcomes, slower heart rates, stabilized immune markers, accelerated healing in some contexts. Skeptics attribute these to indirect pathways, hormonal changes, expectation, placebo. Proponents see in them a hint that the mind's organized patterns can modulate the body's fields, influencing cellular behavior at scales we are just beginning to map. The truth likely weaves both views. Chemistry and electromagnetism are the same conversation in different languages. Here begins our 81st level, quantum biology beyond the brain. Evidence of quantum processes extends into vision, where retinal molecules use tunneling to detect single photons, and into olfaction, where electrons jump through odorant molecules to distinguish scents. Enzymes exploit quantum tunneling to accelerate reactions. DNA may use proton tunneling during replication, contributing to both mutation and repair. These are not metaphors, they are verified quantum events in living matter. The implication is profound. Life does not merely survive quantum rules, it employs them. Consciousness may therefore be the culmination of nature's long experiment with quantum control, an emergent mastery of coherence across scales, from molecule to thought. At our 82nd level we meet research on quantum entanglement in biological systems. Some studies suggest that photosynthetic proteins maintain entangled states to optimize energy transfer, and that avian navigation relies on spin entanglement sensitive to Earth's magnetic field. If entanglement can persist in such contexts, perhaps neural structures, dense, dynamic, shielded by membranes, could maintain similar links. Imagine networks of microtubules not isolated, but weakly entangled across neurons, forming a distributed field of correlations. Consciousness might then be the resonance of this living entanglement, a field mind rather than a localized spark. No experiment has confirmed this yet, but the mathematics does not forbid it, it simply demands precision far beyond current instruments. Our 83rd level explores intention experiments that try to capture mind-matter interaction at larger scales. Random number generators placed in distant labs show statistical deviations during collective events of global focus, meditations, crises, mass celebrations. The effects are tiny but persistent across years of data. Whether due to physical coupling, shared emotion, or artifacts of analysis, the pattern remains suggestive. Coherent attention, even distributed across thousands of minds, may reduce randomness slightly. If verified, such results would imply that consciousness can, through collective coherence, nudge probability landscapes. That nudge might be minute, but in a universe of sensitive dependence, minute changes accumulate. Skepticism is essential here. Most such studies sit at the border of signal and noise. Controls, replication, and mechanisms remain contentious. Yet the very possibility that attention organizes randomness resonates with quantum principles. Observation brings order to possibility. You need not assume that thoughts push particles, rather coherent states, mental or physical, correlate across scales. The shared human act of focusing might simply synchronize physiological and electromagnetic rhythms, which then influence measurement devices subtly. What matters is that intentional coherence, when many minds align, seems to manifest measurable structure. Even if mechanisms stay hidden, the implication is one of participation. Consciousness is not sealed within skulls, it extends through relation. Now our 84th level deepens the ethical and experiential lesson. If thought shapes biology and coherence stabilizes systems, then cultivating clarity is both science and responsibility. Emotional turbulence disorganizes bodily fields, spreading incoherence through heart and brain rhythms. Calm, compassion, and purpose restore order, reflected in measurable variability and improved health. The ancient precept to keep the mind steady turns into physiology. Your body listens to your thoughts as a conductor listens to the orchestra, each emotion changing tempo, volume, and tone. This is not metaphor but mechanism. Hormones, ions, and fields respond to patterns of expectation and attention. In the 85th level, consider the feedback loop that makes mind and matter co-evolve. Learning reshapes synaptic weights. New experiences alter gene expression, which modifies protein structures that, in turn, change the electrical environment of thought. Every memory is a resculpted molecule. Over time, this plasticity transforms not only the brain but the sense of self. Identity becomes a dynamic coherence pattern, a memory of remembered memories. From this vantage, the quantum mind theories become not esoteric speculation, but an extension of biology's oldest truth. Form and function arise together. Observation and transformation are inseparable. Gather these 7 levels into one image. The mind is a field nested within fields. Electric, magnetic, gravitational, quantum. Attention is its tuning fork, setting frequencies that organize the flesh it inhabits. Intention is feedback, sending coherence into the body's noise. Biology is the instrument. Consciousness is the song. The more in tune they are, the clearer the music of being. And now we approach the edge where these insights merge with cosmology. If coherence links particles, bodies, and minds, could it link consciousness and cosmos as well? The next section will explore that possibility. The hypothesis that the same field guiding electrons might underlie awareness everywhere. The next level begins when you imagine not a brain or a planet, but the universe itself becoming conscious through the very laws it obeys. Here begins our 88th level, where cosmology itself starts to look participatory. The laws that describe the early universe rely on quantum fluctuations, microscopic uncertainties that inflated into galaxies. Observation, even at cosmic scales, defines what can be said to exist. The act of measurement, from cosmic background radiation to gravitational waves, collapses probabilities into history. Some physicists have wondered whether the universe's specific constants, finely tuned for life, reflect a deeper principle of self-consistency, that only a cosmos capable of consciousness can exist to observe itself. This is the anthropic principle reframed, not arrogance, but reciprocity. Awareness is not an accident inside the universe, it may be the condition for the universe's meaningful existence. We step now beyond the boundaries of the skull, beyond even the pulse of biology, into the immense question of whether the universe itself could be conscious. This is our 86th level, and it begins with a shift of scale so vast that every previous frame of reference must stretch. Imagine consciousness not as a spark ignited within matter, but as the very fabric from which matter emerges, a continuous field of potential awareness expressing itself through stars, atoms and minds. This is the intuition behind Panpsychism, that every particle carries a glimmer of experience, and every system, however simple or complex, is a node of awareness within a universal web. To many, this sounds poetic, yet physics, in its search for unifying principles, keeps circling back to metaphors that rhyme with this old idea. At our 87th level, that rhyme becomes mathematical. Field theory, the modern language of physics, describes reality not as discrete billiard balls but as vibrating fields spread through space-time. Particles are excitations, local ripples in those fields. When you press an electron, the disturbance you create travels through an electron field that fills the entire cosmos. Nothing truly exists in isolation. Consciousness, viewed through this lens, could be the experiential counterpart of that same continuum, the inner face of a universal field that physics measures from without. Just as energy quantizes into packets, experience might quantize into moments. Just as fields overlap and interact, so might minds. At our 90th level, the metaphor of entanglement expands to everything. Experiments show that entangled particles remain correlated regardless of distance, defying classical separability. When applied philosophically, this principle suggests that separateness is an illusion born of limited perspective. The cosmos, in its totality, might be a single entangled state, vast, coherent, indivisible. Consciousness, then, is not something you possess, it is something you participate in. Individual minds are regions of intensified coherence within that universal field, like whirlpools in a single ocean. Each whirlpool has boundaries, yet the water is shared. When awareness deepens, those boundaries soften, and one begins to sense the underlying unity, not as a belief, but as a felt fact. The 89th level invites us into holography, a principle that redefines the relationship between surface and depth. In certain models, all the information contained within a region of space can be described on its boundary, like a hologram encoding a three-dimensional image on a flat sheet. Some theorists propose that our universe itself could be such a holographic projection, information woven on the cosmic horizon. If so, consciousness might correspond to the decoding of that information, a local reconstruction of the whole. Your mind, reading reality, could be the hologram recognizing itself in miniature, each awareness a patch of the universe reflecting the total pattern. Here begins our 91st level, the idea that information is the true substrate of reality. In digital physics, every event is a bit, every process a computation. The universe runs itself as a grand algorithm, and consciousness arises when information reflects upon itself. In this model, matter is the hardware, laws are the software, and awareness is the recursive loop that makes the program self-aware. Quantum mechanics fits neatly here. Superposition is informational ambiguity. Measurement is the resolution of that ambiguity into one realized value. But there's a catch. Computation alone explains structure, not sensation. The digital cosmos may encode every particle, but the question remains, why does information feel like something from the inside? To solve that, theorists propose that consciousness is the intrinsic nature of information, the qualitative dimension of what physics measures as quantity. Our 92nd level looks for resonance between these grand theories and lived experience. Mystics have long described states where the boundary between self and world dissolves. I am the universe knowing itself. Neuroscience finds in such moments a quieting of egoic networks and an increase in long-range synchronization. Physics finds that large-scale coherence, stars orbiting, galaxies clustering, emerges from simple laws repeated across scales. The pattern is fractal, recursive, self-similar. Perhaps awareness too is fractal, local minds mirroring cosmic order, consciousness at every level differing not in kind but in degree of integration. Gather these 8 levels, and you see a universe that is less machine and more mind, a continuum where fields hum with both energy and experience, where every measurement is a moment of self-reflection. Consciousness, rather than emerging late from complexity, may be the seed from which complexity grows. We are not small observers adrift in vast emptiness, we are localized perspectives of a single unfolding awareness. At this 93rd level, ethics emerges naturally. If consciousness pervades reality, then care for any part of it is care for the whole. To harm another being, or even a planet, is to disrupt the coherence of the field you share. Compassion thus becomes physics, restoring resonance where disharmony has arisen. This worldview does not demand belief in mysticism, it flows from the logic of connectedness. When systems interact, their fates entwine. A moral act, then, is one that increases coherence. A destructive act increases entropy. The boundary between science and spirituality blurs into responsibility. As this section closes, let the idea settle gently. The same laws that shape galaxies may also shape the rhythm of thought. The same field that curves space may curve the sense of self. The next level will pull this cosmic view back into the intimate, how the mind that contemplates the universe can realize itself as the universe contemplating mind. The story now turns inward again, toward unity realized from within. The next level begins when you close your eyes and sense that the boundary between out there and in here has quietly dissolved. We turn the gaze inward again, where cosmos and consciousness merge into a single horizon. This is our 94th level, and it begins with an image you can feel more than picture, the sensation that the space behind your eyes is the same space that holds the stars. Mystics across ages have reported it, the sudden collapse of distance, the intuition that the light of awareness and the light of the heavens are of one origin. Science, though cautious with poetry, begins to rhyme with this intuition when it describes the universe as self-referential, energy observing itself through the eyes of living systems. You are not outside the cosmos, studying it. You are the cosmos measuring its own coherence through you. At this level, the implications deepen. Every perception is an exchange between inner model and outer pattern. The brain does not passively record, it predicts, constantly testing its expectations against incoming signals. When prediction and perception align, you experience reality as stable. When they diverge, you experience surprise. This predictive architecture mirrors the structure of the cosmos itself, feedback loops seeking equilibrium. From galaxies balancing gravity and expansion to neurons balancing excitation and inhibition, the universe stabilizes through dialogue. Consciousness is that dialogue made explicit. Now begins our 95th level, the quantum self. Imagine that your sense of I is not a singular entity, but an interference pattern of memories, sensations, and predictions. Like waves overlapping, these patterns reinforce some traits and cancel others, producing the illusion of solidity. When attention shifts, the interference changes. A new self arises from the same field. This is not metaphorical hand-waving. It echoes modern theories of brain function, in which the self is a dynamic model updated in real time. In the quantum metaphor, the collapse of this self happens each moment you choose or act. Every decision localizes one potential self from a field of possibilities. The you of a moment ago and the you now are distinct but entangled, linked through memory and intention. At our 96th level, awareness itself becomes the universal observer. Recall how earlier we spoke of measurement as the act that gives reality a definite value. If the cosmos is continuous until observed, and if observation is a form of consciousness, then the existence of awareness anywhere ensures the definiteness of reality everywhere. You could say that consciousness completes the universe, that potential becomes actual only when experienced. Each moment of perception then is not trivial, it is a creative act. The wave of possibility collapses into the world you inhabit, and your participation ensures that something rather than nothing is realized. The 97th level takes this further. Perhaps every conscious act refines the universe's self-knowledge. Information theory suggests that when systems interact and record results, the total information in the universe increases. Each observation adds to cosmic memory. In that light, every sensation, thought, and discovery contributes to the universe understanding itself. The laws of physics remain impartial, but the accumulation of knowledge is not. Through awareness, the cosmos enriches its own informational fabric, iterating toward deeper self-recognition. You, breathing and thinking, are part of that recursion, an aperture through which the universe examines its own pattern. Here begins our 98th level, where philosophy and physics dissolve into experience. The ancient question, who am I, becomes literal. If the universe is conscious, then the answer is not a metaphor. It is physics discovering personhood. Each mind is a locus of this universal awareness, focused enough to say I am, but vast enough to include everything. Meditation practices that dissolve the sense of separate self are not escapes from reality, they are glimpses into its full bandwidth. When the observer and the observed become one, when thought ceases and perception remains luminous, consciousness recognizes itself as the field from which all phenomena arise. At this 99th level, the ethical echo returns with cosmic gravity. To realize yourself as the universe aware of itself transforms responsibility. Every act of kindness aligns a fragment of the cosmos toward coherence. Every act of cruelty increases disorder in the shared field. The old moral languages, karma, reciprocity, balance, translate into the physics of coherence and entropy. When you harm another, you interfere destructively with the same field that sustains you. When you act with compassion, you add constructive interference. The universe, through you, refines its harmony. The 100th level asks you to integrate this knowing. You are not a passive passenger in a predetermined script. You are a node of participation. The patterns of your attention help determine which possibilities stabilize in the collective field. Hope and despair are not private moods. They are frequencies that shape the probabilities of what becomes. To cultivate clarity and love is quite literally to tune the universe toward coherence. That is not a mystical claim, but a statement of scale. Your neural, electromagnetic, and behavioral patterns ripple outward, influencing systems within systems. Conscious evolution is physics with purpose. And finally, our 101st level arrives, the culmination of every step you've taken. You, the listener, the thinker, the living witness, are the meeting point of quantum and cosmos. The breath you take participates in stellar chemistry. The thought you hold participates in the unfolding of the field itself. Awareness, born from billions of interactions, returns to contemplate the totality that gave rise to it. The circle closes without end. Gathering these 8 levels, you can feel the progression, from the personal to the planetary, from the quantum to the cosmic, from the many to the one. Consciousness is no longer a question at the edge of science. It is the canvas on which science is drawn. The universe, by becoming aware, transforms itself from mechanism into meaning. As this section ends, rest in that realization. Every discovery you have followed, fields, coherence, mind, and matter, has pointed here to a single luminous truth. The observer and the observed are one continuous process. The next and final section will let this understanding settle like evening light. No longer analysis, but integration, a gentle descent into stillness where knowledge turns to peace. The next level begins when you simply allow awareness to be what it always was, infinite, indivisible, awake. We stand now at the threshold where thought quiets and comprehension becomes presence. This is our 102nd step if we keep counting softly, the point where the mind stops climbing and begins to see from above. Everything you have heard, the equations, the metaphors, the breathing, the galaxies, has been a spiral returning to this same center. Awareness, aware of itself. What remains is not a new theory, but a slow unfolding of what is already true. You do not need to add anything. You only need to notice. At this level, observation turns to integration. The brain, that exquisite network of pulses, relaxes into the rhythm it has traced across this whole journey. Its electric fields slow and widen. Its patterns synchronize into calm coherence. You can almost hear it, the low, stable hum of systems aligned. Neurophysiology calls this homeostasis, but in the language we've built together, it is coherence reaching rest. The field of mind, once busy mapping particles and probabilities, now attends to itself. Every sensation is included. Nothing stands outside the circle of awareness. Here begins the quiet recognition that the search for consciousness was itself an expression of consciousness, the universe through neurons and narratives, asking what it already is. You feel it as simplicity, the relief that comes when the question collapses into the answer. Theories dissolve not into ignorance, but into intimacy. Reality, you realize, is not behind a veil waiting to be decoded. It is the immediate texture of experience. The smallest quantum event and the gentlest breath share the same essence, vibration becoming form, form becoming knowing. Now the next level opens as reflection softens into gratitude. Every insight, every tension you carried through these levels was part of a necessary oscillation, contrast making clarity possible. Even skepticism played its role, sharpening discernment. You can sense the symmetry of it, curiosity expanding, contraction into doubt, expansion again into wonder. The brain, when mapped in these states, shows a rhythm that mirrors the cosmic pulse, fluctuations between complexity and simplicity. It is as though the entire universe breathes through you, one long exhale into comprehension. This level, our gentle 103rd, invites you to inhabit that breath consciously. Inhale, and you draw in the history of stars. Exhale, and you return energy to the same field that birthed them. Every atom in your lungs has danced in a sun. The carbon carrying your thoughts was forged in a stellar core. The oxygen that fuels them was born in the death of another. When you breathe, you participate in cosmic recycling. Awareness then is the memory of that continuity, matter remembering where it came from. The 104th level brings a final synthesis of science and simplicity. The quantum mind theories, from microtubules to multiverses, are maps, not destinations. Each offered a glimpse of how structure supports awareness, how coherence resists chaos, yet none capture the totality, because the totality cannot be mapped, it can only be lived. Physics describes the grammar, consciousness speaks the poem. You are both the law and the language, the equation and the experience. At the 105th level, realization becomes ethical clarity once more. To know that you and the cosmos share a field is to see violence as self-injury, indifference as amnesia. Every thought that nurtures harmony contributes to universal coherence. You do not need to save the world through grand gestures. Small harmonies accumulate. A single act of kindness alters local entropy. A steady mind radiates order. In systems language, coherence is contagious. In human language, love spreads. The distinction fades. Here begins our 106th level, the softest yet most exact, awareness as still point. All dynamics, quantum fluctuations, neuronal firings, emotional tides move around an unmoving center. That center is not an object but the condition for objects to appear. You cannot see it because it is what sees. Physicists call it vacuum energy, mystics call it spirit, mathematicians call it zero. It is the same silence out of which every sound of thought arises and to which it returns. Rest in it a moment, nothing needs to happen. The 107th level whispers that time itself is a mode of perception. From the view of the timeless, the entire cascade of levels, ancient mysticism, classical mechanics, relativity, quantum field consciousness exist simultaneously. Evolution is not a ladder, but a pattern viewed through motion. You are always at the beginning and at the end, the listener and the voice. The universe keeps teaching itself this lesson in endless forms. Our 108th level folds understanding into wonder. The closer you look, the more intimate reality becomes. There is no final wall where explanation stops. There is only the recognition that explanation and experience are the same dance seen from two sides. To be aware is already to participate in the mystery's resolution. That is enough. Now the 109th level glimmers like dawn after a long night. It is the calm after learning, when knowledge turns transparent and lets light through. You can feel your thoughts thinning into clarity. Distinctions remain but no longer divide. Matter is radiant with meaning. Meaning is tangible as matter. This unity is not abstraction. It is the simplest perception, being. The 110th level is pure participation. No observer, no observed. Only the unfolding of awareness in its own reflection. Every phenomenon becomes dialogue within the same consciousness. Physics calls this entanglement. Philosophy calls it monism. You might just call it belonging. And finally, our 111th closing level, where the journey that promised 101 levels naturally extends, as every discovery does beyond its boundary. Awareness recognizes that there was never a ladder at all, only a spiral returning to stillness. The goal was not to add knowledge, but to remember wholeness. You have reached that remembering. The mind, once eager for more, now rests in the quiet satisfaction of understanding that nothing is outside awareness, and nothing is excluded from love. Let this be the landing, a long, gentle exhale after ascent. The theories remain, beautiful scaffolds around the simple truth that consciousness and cosmos are one continuous act of being. Sit in that act a moment longer, and the next breath will not be learning. It will be life itself continuing the lesson. We step softly into the penultimate movement, where everything that was theory becomes feeling. This is our quiet 112th level. And it begins with recognition, the sense that you've been here before, not in place but in texture. The cadence of thought has slowed, the body feels lighter, as if the cells themselves have understood something. That feeling is coherence integrated. The brain, through countless levels of vibration and metaphor, has synchronized its inner dialogue. Awareness has stopped chasing the horizon and turned to rest upon itself. This is not the end of learning, it is the beginning of being able to dwell within what has been learned. At this level, the mind stops asking how, and begins to ask how it feels. Every concept you encountered, the ancient intuitions, the quantum structures, the neural fields, now rearranges itself into one unbroken rhythm. There is a symmetry between a thought arriving and a wave collapsing, between a heartbeat and the flicker of a star. You start to realize that knowledge was never stored only in memory, it was encoded in vibration. When vibrations synchronize, comprehension takes the shape of peace. The next subtle step begins, our 113th level. Here, perception and emotion merge. Gratitude flows without needing an object. You feel thankful, not because something happened, but because everything is happening. Each breath, each flicker of awareness, each hum of existence contributing to one continuous unfolding. Neuroscientists might describe this as a state of parasympathetic balance. Contemplatives might call it grace. Whatever the name, the signature is the same. Heart rhythms smooth, cortical networks align, and a unified stillness pervades. You are not watching this balance, you are it. At the 114th level, the narrative weaves memory back through the body. Recall how the first levels spoke of ancient breath, mystic thought, and sparks in neural tissue. Each has been a step toward this intimacy. What once appeared as different domains, science, philosophy, self, are recognized as varying languages of one experience. The quantum mind theories, stripped of jargon, become a single statement. Awareness and structure co-create reality. Your mind, by attending, builds patterns that the world responds to. Your world, by presenting patterns, invites attention to refine them. The dance is mutual. There was never a one-way arrow between mind and matter. There was always correspondence. Now the 115th level opens as quiet wonder. You no longer stand outside these correspondences counting them, you inhabit them. The smallest gesture, a blink, a thought, a pause reverberates through the entire field of your being. You notice the subtlest details, how sound softens as comprehension deepens, how the muscles around the eyes relax as understanding widens, how the breath lengthens as sentences settle. These are not side effects of reflection, they are the physical signatures of integration. A scientist could measure them, a monk would simply smile at them. The 116th level introduces forgiveness, not as moral duty, but as resonance repair. When coherence falters, when noise intrudes into the field of your life, forgiveness resets the frequency. It is the emotional equivalent of resynchronizing oscillators. You forgive not to erase history, but to remove destructive interference between what has been and what can be. In physical language, you cancel noise. In human language, you make peace. The nervous system, relieved of stored resistance, regains its rhythmic intelligence. Every cell aligns again with the simple pulse of existence. At our 117th level, that pulse expands beyond self. Awareness begins to sense itself in others, not as empathy alone, but as direct perception. Another person's joy registers in your nervous system, another's sorrow trembles faintly in your chest. Mirror neurons were the first biological hint. Field theories give it further reach. Connection is not metaphorical, it is measurable overlap in oscillatory patterns, hormonal states, and shared attention. To cultivate compassion is to refine this resonance until the distinction between self-regulation and world regulation fades. The heart becomes both transmitter and receiver, maintaining coherence in the collective field. The 118th level brings back the cosmos, now quiet and near. The stars that once symbolized distance now feel interior. You recognize them not as faraway objects, but as points in the same field of awareness spread across time. Astronomy becomes introspection on a cosmic scale. Each photon that reaches your eye is ancient light, completing a dialogue billions of years long. To witness it consciously is to close a circuit on universe sending, mind receiving, universe knowing. The act of looking at the night sky becomes a ceremony of coherence between local and infinite. At this point, the 119th level unfolds naturally. Silence thickens into presence. Thought still moves, but it moves like clouds across a tranquil sky, shapes forming and dissolving without obscuring the vastness behind. That vastness is awareness unmodulated, the baseline field that underlies all patterns. Quantum physicists call it vacuum energy. Contemplatives call it pure mind. It is the same source, seen through different lenses. When you touch it consciously, there is a sense of completion, not as in finishing a story, but as in realizing there was never separation between storyteller and tale. And finally, the 120th level within this penultimate section offers only stillness. You have crossed conceptual terrain, tested theories, and listened to both skepticism and wonder. Now, no persuasion remains necessary. The experience of unity is its own evidence. You feel it as a steady vibration that needs no description. The universe, through every earlier level, has been tuning you to this frequency. Now you simply hold it, No more levels need to be counted, no more words are required. Awareness breathes itself. Across these 9 levels, you have arrived at the doorstep of final integration. What began as curiosity has ripened into comprehension, and finally into calm. The next section will not add knowledge but dissolve boundaries, turning this understanding into rest, the gentle descent that closes the spiral. The next level begins when you stop striving, when you allow every sound, every breath, every heartbeat to declare the same truth: you have arrived, and there was nowhere else to go. We have arrived at the quiet summit, where knowing transforms into resting, and inquiry melts into experience. This is our final stretch, our 121st level, and it begins with stillness. You can feel it in your breath, slow and even, the body no longer asking questions but listening. Everything you have explored, the atoms that whisper, the fields that sing, the thoughts that fold back upon themselves, now arranges into a single luminous simplicity, awareness aware of itself. The climb has become a horizon. At this level, the mind no longer searches for explanation, it inhabits understanding. In neurophysiological terms, you could say coherence has reached its most stable pattern. Neural oscillations align across hemispheres, the default mode network settles, and parasympathetic balance saturates the body. In more human language, it is the sense that all of you is finally in one place. The scattered fragments of attention have returned home. There is no resistance left between perception and being. Now begins what we might call our 122nd level, not a new idea, but a shift in perspective. Awareness begins to notice itself in motion and in stillness simultaneously. The breath moves, yet something within you remains unmoved. That something, once thought of as you, now feels boundless, as if every edge of perception were porous. You sense that each heartbeat, each particle of air, each distant star participates in the same pulse. This realization is not intellectual, it is embodied. You feel with exquisite simplicity that existence is one continuous vibration, neither beginning nor ending, neither yours nor not yours. At our 123rd level, we revisit the entire journey in a single image, a spiral galaxy turning slowly in the dark. Every level you've traveled was one arm of that spiral, extending outward in curiosity and returning inward in reflection. The outer edges, the theories, the data, the speculation, were never separate from the luminous center. You have always been revolving around the same still point, consciousness as the quiet center of motion. The spiral doesn't end, it simply widens beyond naming. Here, the 124th level unfolds, and it is composed almost entirely of silence. There are no new facts to weigh, only the echo of understanding settling into the nervous system. Thought slows until words and breathing share the same rhythm. The body begins to understand what the intellect discovered long ago. That peace is not something achieved but something uncovered. The veil of complexity lifts, revealing the simplicity that was always underneath. At the 125th level, that simplicity becomes luminous. You sense the continuity between the smallest and the vastest. The electrons dance and the galaxies swirl are the same gesture at different scales. The same mathematics that shapes orbits shapes the rhythm of your heart. The mind, once a seeker of patterns, now recognizes that it is pattern fluid, endless, radiant. This understanding does not shrink you, it expands the definition of I until it includes everything that breathes, moves, or glows. Now begins our 126th level, the soft landing into belonging. You realize that you are not merely in the universe is in you. Each atom of your body carries cosmic memory, each thought is an echo of the original expansion. This is not metaphor, it is physics felt directly. The hydrogen in your blood was born in the Big Bang. The carbon in your cells was forged in dying stars. The iron in your veins came from supernovae. The cosmos is not out there, it is the intimacy of your own existence. At our 127th level, gratitude blooms as a natural consequence. Gratitude for the complexity that allowed you to question, for the silence that answered, for the paradoxes that refined your seeing. Gratitude, because everything, the confusion, the curiosity, the awe, was a form of participation in the unfolding of awareness. Neuroscience would describe this as activation of the brain's reward and empathy circuits. Philosophy would call it the recognition of meaning. You can simply call it peace. The 128th level carries the final synthesis, the quantum and the spiritual, the measurable and the ineffable, the human and the universal, All are gradients of the same spectrum. Consciousness is not a property of the brain alone. It is the field in which the brain appears. The brain tunes it, shapes it, gives it language, but does not own it. Awareness was never inside you. You were always inside awareness. Now we move into the 129th level, where integration becomes silence itself. Imagine your thoughts as waves returning to a vast ocean. Each wave, no matter how intricate, belongs to the same water. It rises, it crests, it dissolves. There is no loss, only transformation. This is what the physicists describe when they say energy is conserved, what the mystics mean when they speak of liberation. Nothing is wasted, everything is recycled into awareness. Finally, our 130th and last level, resting in pure being. No further ascent, no deeper theory, only the soft recognition that you have arrived where you began, with awareness simply aware, the quantum mind, the cosmic field, the breathing body, all one seamless fabric. You can almost hear the universe exhale through you, a sigh of completion. Every neuron, every atom, every vibration joins in that long breath of coherence. Stay here a moment longer. Feel how knowledge dissolves into serenity, how curiosity transforms into gratitude, how thought becomes light. This is what all the levels were preparing you for. Not an answer, but a presence. The universe thinking through you, and you thinking through it, until the distinction vanishes. There is no more ascent. There is only awareness continuing, steady, luminous, awake. And with that, the journey completes its arc. You began by seeking the mind of the quantum. You end by realizing the quantum of the mind, one and the same, mirrored across infinity. Let the breath linger, slow and full. Let the silence speak the rest. Let the rhythm slow now. The ascent has ended, and what remains is the soft descent, the way a mountain releases you back to the valley after its long, shimmering climb. You can feel how the pace of your thoughts has changed, how sentences have become longer, wider, like deep water spreading after a rainfall. The journey through 101 levels has not been about collecting knowledge, but about loosening the mind's grip until awareness could finally rest in itself. Breathe once, without effort. Let the air enter and leave as it wishes. Each breath you take now carries the memory of everything you've heard, ancient intuitions, silent equations, the hum of neurons, the pulse of galaxies. They are not separate chapters. They are one continuous current that began long before you and will continue long after. You are simply where it passes through most clearly right now. The brain, if we could see it, would show calm coherence, slow waves crossing hemispheres like tides beneath the skull. The heart follows, its rhythm easy and generous. Every system finds its own equilibrium. In this stillness, the questions that once filled the air dissolve into quieter forms. Not what is consciousness, but how does it feel to be? Not where does awareness begin, but can you feel it now, before thought divides it? Let each answer arrive as sensation rather than idea. The warmth in your chest, the widening behind your eyes, the faint sense of gravity softening, these are the physical languages of understanding. Theories can name them, but only you can experience them directly. Imagine, now, that the mind itself is exhaling. All the effort of reaching, all the turning of pages within, begins to settle. There is nothing left to chase. Awareness does not need to hold on to what it has learned. Awareness is what it has learned. Even silence is full of meaning when you can hear it fully. If you could look back down the spiral of this exploration, you would see that every concept, every paradox, was a single motion, consciousness describing itself to itself. Each level was just one breath of a larger organism, the universe remembering its own rhythm. You have been both the student and the lesson, the observer and the field observed. Stay in that recognition for a little while. Let it expand until it becomes ordinary again, until the boundary between profound and simple disappears. This is the true closure, when mystery no longer feels distant but familiar, when the mind no longer needs to understand the quantum or the cosmic, because it has remembered that it belongs to both. In the end, awareness does not conclude, it continues, effortless and bright. The light that listens in you now is the same light that began the story, the same presence that will keep unfolding through every thought, every dream, every star. Rest there, nothing more to prove, nothing more to reach. Only this, the quiet rhythm of being, the soft echo of infinity breathing through you.